Episode 97, Don't Read the Comments. This is Matthew, and in this episode Andrew and I are joined by David and Michael, two of our fellow authors from Still Unbelievable, the book. We spent 3 hours going through the listener comments from my appearance on Unbelievable, where I conversed with Mike DeVigilio about his book Uninvented. This episode goes very long, and we have a good time picking apart the variety of comments. There is laughter, and there is frustration. Various resources are mentioned, and as always, the links are in the show notes. Hello everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Still Unbelievable. This one is probably going to go long. There's going to be swearing, there's probably going to be alcohol, there'll be laughter, and other frivolous stuff. What this is going to be, this is going to be titled Don't Read the Comments. This is where we feed back to my appearance on the Unbelievable show talking about Mike DeVigilio's book Uninvented. Now, just as a side effect, I don't know what order these shows are going to be, but we're recording this show a week before Andrew and I are scheduled to have our own chat with Mike, but I might actually swap the order with the way those shows are going to be. So if you've already heard Mike's show, by the time you're listening to this, you'll have known that I have decided to swap the order. And if you haven't, you know that one's coming up shortly. So that's what I'm going to do here. So what I've done is because I'm an Englishman, I don't get enough attention. I decided that I want to show it's all about me. So what I've done is I've gone through the YouTube comments underneath the video on the Unbelievable YouTube channel and grabbed all the comments. I've grabbed the comments from the live stream, which are all pithy one-liners. And then I've gone and done a selection of comments from the comments underneath, because there's over 450 comments there. We're not going to go through all of those. I've just picked out some juicy ones, tried to make it a bit balanced. And what we've got is we've got a foursome here, and we're basically going to go through them. So that's why it's going to go long. We're not going to do half an hour on each comment, because that simply isn't practical. But we'll probably hang around a couple of the comments, because some of them are proper great. Right, so Andrew, this is going to be a fun show, isn't it?
It is going to be a fun show. Hello, kids. Thank you for taking the podcast exit back to Still Unbelievable, and I am really expecting some fun. Matthew, we've got two guests.
We have, right. Well, we've got the one that's known to everybody, I hope, already. David, welcome back onto Still Unbelievable.
Patreon.com/redletters.
That's the one. Now, you're on here because we did a show a week ago, and we're going to make a reference to that at the appropriate point in the comments, because you threw one on me and made me expand on a little snippet of a story that I mentioned on Unbelievable.
It was fantastic. It was possibly the best part of the show. I've already had comments. People love
There were
that.
Man tears. How can it possibly be great? There were man tears.
They were British man tears.
Even worse.
Is that a thing?
It is.
Link in the show notes if you don't know your way there. And I think this is the first time ever on to Still Unbelievable. Welcome, Michael. Good to see you, sir. How do we know you?
We all collaborated on the book Still Unbelievable.
We did.
I had a chapter, and each of you all had a chapter or two, and it was quite a fun experience. And I've remained in loose contact with several of you since then. And I was struck by how poorly Mr. Vigilio's explanation of his book on Justin's podcast. So I invited myself here.
I've got to say that in the book Still Unbelievable, a lot of you listeners may have read it. If you haven't, you can go to reasonpress.net and download a copy for free. That book was a good expression of a response to Justin Brierley's book. But within that expression, I have to say that Michael's chapter stands out as one of the best written chapters in the book. So I think Michael's being a little humble. If you don't have a copy of Still Unbelievable, you should read what Michael had to say. So
thank you, Andrew. I'm flattered.
You folks know David. You know him from Skeptics and Seekers and Skeptics and Seekers Sunday sermons. So that's 4S. I will say as a little bit of a teaser that you can expect some crossover episodes in the not too distant future between the Skeptics and Seekers properties and Still Unbelievable. Back in the day, for you old hands around here, we had some round tables. There will be more of those that are in the works. So there's a teaser for the future, and two of the best voices that collaborate here on SU. We're privileged to have them. Thank you both for joining. All right, Matthew, I've done what I can to make our guests feel welcome.
Well, we have an awful lot of pithy comments to get through, so let's start right at the very beginning. So this section of the show is basically reading the comments straight from the live chat, as I already said. So this is going to be in the order in which they came up in the live chat. So they were written at various points during the video, from the earliest through to the latest towards the end of the video. Some are better than others, so we'll just basically get onto them, and some show a little bit of the thinking behind some Christians. So let's get right from the very beginning.
Christianity may be unbelievable, but that's why we need faith.
David, I think you've got a lot to say about this one.
I was going to say pass. This feels like a setup. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, Christianity is unbelievable, and Christians vacillate back and forth between two poles. One pole is, oh, there's so much proof, you have to be an idiot not to believe in Christianity. And at the other pole, well, obviously, the evidence in and of itself isn't sufficient enough. Jesus wants us to have faith. And so I don't even know where we're supposed to land between those two poles. And so after saying all that, I pass.
Yeah, just what I wanted to say. So thank you.
Matthew, what I noticed as I read through the comments, several of these statements could be read either way. This could be, a wry skeptic. I believe it was probably a Christian and a believer, but we've heard this one before. Like David said, we also hear the proof is obvious. If you just look at it, everything, will be plain to you. Yeah, this wasn't a strong selling point from the Christian side, especially in light of the author's approach to the topic.
Yes, I very intentionally left any identifying information from all of these comments. I left the comments just as they are. I think because of where the comments are coming from, the majority are from Christians, but they're certainly not all from Christians.
Yeah.
Matthew, I've got a one-liner for this one. I think it's, I think some of our listeners are predicting what I'm about to say. I'll go ahead and say it. Christianity may be unbelievable. That's why we need evidence.
Yep, I don't have faith. That's why Christianity is still unbelievable.
That's why we need evidence, not faith.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on.
David's chomping at the bit now.
Yeah. Wake him up. Right, number 2. Yeah, that was nice and easy, wasn't it?
It's more unbelievable to believe we are here by random chaos.
Well, since nobody believes that, we can probably get to number 3.
I know, but this gets at the kind of comment that we see day in, day out on Christian v Atheist forums and stuff like that. It's a kind of comment that's all over my Twitter feed. It's just there constantly. You just can't get away from it.
There's a difference between random chaos and not having a designer. I think that the Christian just seems to be incapable of understanding that bit of nuance. So as Andrew said, I don't know anyone who says, well, it's all random chaos. The Christian wants to say, then you believe that God designed it. No, that's just one of those tired tropes where I think Christians sometimes intentionally misunderstand that I just get tired of dealing with. So in short, pass.
Yeah, but it is one of those things though that it plugs into this thinking that if it wasn't God, then it must be this thing that's the polar opposite in every way. There's no way that any of it could have any kind of organizational structure because it's purely natural, therefore blah, and it must be that, and there's no nuance applied whatsoever to this kind of argument.
In the Christians' defense, this is what they've been sold.
Yes, that's true.
If they've read anything but the Bible or the parts of it they really like, they've been sold this by apologists who straw man the argument for the existence of order in the universe. That's a rabbit hole I don't think this conversation, draws out. But random chaos, that's stuff we've heard from other apologists. And if all they're reading is a Why Atheists Are Stupid, apologetics book, this would be it's one of their standard tropes.
Yes, it is.
It is. And the next step along from here is, well, if it's not random chaos and it's not God imposing the order, then the next question, when someone like me says, but we don't actually believe that it was random chaos, however you gloss that, that's not what we believe. The next reasoning fallacy occurs. Well, okay, how do you explain it? Right? Again, if you can't explain it, it must be God is the next step. And that brings us full circle.
Right, moving on.
The Jesus story snowballed and evolved into the Bible.
That's not how I would phrase it, but that's probably what happened.
I wouldn't put it that way myself. And I do have a semi-theory on the Jesus story and how it got there. But I do think that a lot of it is, in fact, a word that I wasn't prepared to say, so I might flub it up, euhemerization, where a person of myth gets translated over time into a person of history.
Yeah.
And so that's a process. It's a known process. It's happened many times. We've got a lot of examples of it. I'm just going to pass again.
So the next one, the comment is straightforward.
What about anti-naturalistic bias?
Now, the reason why that comment exists has got to be because right near the beginning of the show, when we were still pretty much in our introductions or talking about the book, I made the complaint that Mike at multiple points in his book says that the only way you can not believe these stories is by having an anti-supernatural bias. So someone has picked that up and jumped in with a comment. What's about anti-naturalistic bias? Does anyone want to say that that's actually a thing?
There is an anti-natural bias out there in the world. I think it stands in religious communities every day. I think we see it all the time. It's phrased like this: I don't understand why things happen, but God has a plan.
Yeah, I mean, the whole story of religious faith, especially revealed religious faith, is inherently anti-naturalistic. If you believe in miracles, which was a topic, in this conversation, can't be explained by natural laws unless you take a really broad definition is used by some apologists and saying it's not unnatural if God does it. But the very idea of even mind-body dualism, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff, around, the creation of the cosmos. In order to believe the book, you've got to step away from naturalist or natural explanations of a lot of things. This
question comes up probably because there was a line that your interlocutor kept saying, the anti-supernatural bias, and kept accusing you of having an anti-supernatural bias. I, for one, have an anti-supernatural bias. Sorry, I've lived 52, almost 53 years. I haven't seen the supernatural. I haven't had it even properly defined. That's irrelevant, though. That's just a smokescreen. So it doesn't really matter what bias I bring to the table. The only thing that matters is that when we're making a case, that we bring evidence to the table. And so you can smash my anti-supernatural bias into tiny little bits by just bringing something supernatural to the table and showing it. And we're done. It's just a kind of a poisoning the well fallacy to say, oh, well, you have a bias against the supernatural. Yeah, I have a bias against silly stuff that doesn't seem possible, but hush my mouth. You can shut me up today. It's as easy as producing a miracle.
Yeah, if it was that easy.
They want you to agree philosophically before they do anything practically. And I'm never going to agree with them philosophically about miracles. I will agree practically if they show it to me. My philosophy is not the thing that controls all of my opinions. So yep. It's just a tactic, and I pass. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Good one. Right, this one's just for you, David.
Is not the walking on water at the very least an allegory for having faith?
I don't know.
Someone's been thinking about that story much too hard.
Right. Well, see, the problem is there are a lot of Christians who, when you ask them what's literal, what should we take as literal and what's figurative, and then you drill down and you ask, okay, is the virgin birth real? Is walking on water real? And a lot of Christians will actually say, well, those things may be not literally real, and so they come up with a lot of possibilities of what they could be when they don't want to be backed into a corner of saying, yeah, no, that literally happened. So what do I think the writers intended for it to be? I don't know. I have no reason to take it literally. And taking it allegorically seems to make more sense. But then if it's allegorical, you still have no idea what the writer intended it to mean. So it's really hard to get underneath that.
Okay, I'm going to move straight on because now we get to the first of the comments, which has a little bit of spike to it. So I'm going to stay well away from this one.
How do people make up fiction that seems realistic? Wow, this guy is clueless. They're called writers.
Well, today they do it with ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah, they do. Although I've seen some of the output from ChatGPT and it's a little bit primary school, put it that way.
It can be. We are in a place right now where artificial intelligence can produce things that seem like it's beyond human capacity, depending on who you are and how much you understand about what's being requested.
This statement's obviously a skeptic. There was an interesting thread throughout the comments of, I'm a Christian and this guy's not the sharpest tool in our shed that runs through it. But yeah, I mean, making up fiction that seems realistic is exactly what fiction writers do.
Yes. So
if a piece of fiction is too realistic, it cannot possibly be made up. So much for good criteria.
Right, I'm going to move on because we've covered that one. Next one.
So this is a serious idea of a book. It cannot possibly be made up. That's not an argument. That's a meme line.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I'm glad somebody got the meme bit in. And then just to buck the trend.
This fellow has some good points.
Okay, before you get there, can I just ask you a question, Matt?
Go for it.
About these last few questions. So when I first heard about the book, and I did read the book, I thought, well, obviously he's using some exaggeration here. Because I use exaggeration to make points as well, some hyperbole. Do you think that he had hyperbole in mind, or was he literally believing that the Bible had to be true because it was beyond the capability of a human to write it?
I don't know where to fall on that one, to be honest. I think there is a part of, this is probably something that Andrew and I need to ask him directly, but I think there is a part of him, at the very least, which takes that argument at least semi-seriously.
Okay.
That's my feeling on it, having read it and spoken to him. Although he would probably phrase it differently. I think the line he would take on that would be, nobody who was making this up would write it that way. I think that's probably the way he would answer that question, that challenge. And so because it's written the way it is, and nobody would make it up that way, therefore it's true. So it's a slight modification, and I think it's been condensed to the pithy meme line that we've been throwing about. But I don't think that actually clarifies anything.
Okay. I just wanted to get your sense of it because I didn't want to overly mock something that he was saying tongue in cheek. But when I read his book, he didn't seem to give any ground there. It didn't feel tongue in cheek after reading it. Maybe Brady has a different perspective on it. But if you do get a chance to ask him, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Yes. Go on,
I share
Michael.
your opinions about the book. It's written as a pretty straight piece of apologetic. There was no sense of humor except when he was mocking people who, don't think you can't make this up.
Yeah. Right. Now here's the first one in the theme that Michael was talking about.
I am a Christian. The Gospels are primarily theological documents. There is no threat in acknowledging that.
Yeah. And all the Christians in the world said amen.
Almost all.
Yeah, no, I've talked to plenty that wouldn't acknowledge that, because when you say it's a theological document, you're saying what it really is a sermon, not a history. And they want to say, no, it's a history.
Yeah, for some, it's really important for it to be factually historical.
So it's a matter of genre when they're when they're talking about it. And so if you call it theological document, you're miscategorizing the genre for the certain type of Christian.
Yeah.
Fiction didn't exist in the ancient world. Dude, you are embarrassing Christians with statements like that.
The very best possible response to that was already had on the show.
Mhm.
Had you heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh?
Statements like fiction didn't exist in the ancient world. Now there's I'm going to give them a little bit of slack on that. There's probably qualifications around that, in the sense of, because I've seen other Christians say the same thing, in the sense that fiction as we know it today didn't exist in the ancient world, but that's a completely different thing. That means something very, very different. Fiction did exist, just not the way we read it from our bookshops today. But that doesn't actually help the Bible.
Yeah, I don't even know that I would agree with that. So I've heard the argument too. I've read a lot of old fiction and know of a lot of old fiction. And I think that the Christian is really straining at gnats to say, well, it's different from the fiction today. It's not different in the way that we're talking about. By fiction, we simply mean a story for entertainment or moral purposes that is not literally true. So if you're saying that fiction did not exist in the ancient world, then all the stories about the ancient gods are also true.
Yeah.
They're also history. Christians don't believe it. They only they only believe it when they need to make this point about Christianity. If you turned it around and made that point about some other religion, say Hinduism, then they would make the opposite point. It's a disingenuous argument, and you smacked it down appropriately. You smacked it down better in the show than I could have. I was so happy to hear your answer.
Oh, thank you, David. Love you, dude. Michael, did you want to say something about
Sure.
fiction?
Yeah. Again, they don't want the Bible declared fiction because they want to believe or declare that they're historical documents. Not theological documents. These are historical documents, the historical sources. We see that a lot of many different times. The concept of the lives genre, as written by the Greeks and the Romans, in and around this time, tell all sorts of really awesome stories about just how cool the emperor became after he died, including miracles and ascensions and all that kind of stuff. I've yet to hear an apologist admit that the lives genre is the closest to what the Gospels might be.
There is something else that when you actually read the book, he's very explicit, and it's the Jews didn't write fiction at that point in time, which is why they wouldn't have written Jesus and the stories about him as fiction. And he's very explicit about that. And I don't know enough, and I don't know how to say what I want to say. It's a problematic thing to say. Somebody else that I repeated this to called it out as being borderline racist to say something like that. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I am left uncomfortable, and I don't really want to speak on behalf of the Jews because I have no experience of their culture, and I have no authority to speak for Jews. So I'll make a plea here to any listeners. Do you know someone who is authoritative on Jewish culture from that period of time who could address that specific point? That would be a very interesting thing for us to have a conversation with, even if it's a couple of emails, just to put my record straight so that I know what went on. Whether it turns into an episode or not is besides the point. I just want to know that I know the truth from somebody who can speak authoritatively on this matter, because I don't want to make the mistake of speaking on behalf of the Jews when I really don't have the knowledge to do so with any kind of authority.
Yeah, well, what Jews are we thinking wrote it anyway? How do we know they were Jews? These were Greeks, Hellenistic people writing this, and
Very
so
good point.
Even if they did have some Jewishness in their background, this was also a very syncretistic effort here, and so they were converging some ideas of Jewishness with some ideas of the Hellenistic cultures. And so this wasn't pure Judaism written by pure Jews. So there's that argument really doesn't play well if you say, well, the ancient Jews didn't write that way. Well, this wasn't written by ancient Jews.
Yeah.
So,
but I think that the Christian apologist would also, or at least the fundamentalist would argue that, and they have, that the Gospels were written by the authors they're named for in close to real time. As the events unfolded, they were capturing all this stuff. So that means, Jews such as, the Jesus followers wouldn't have written this, and maybe that's true, and that'd be worth following up on, Matthew. But the idea that it was written, like David said, 30 to 80 years later, by Greek-speaking professional, writers and redactors and editors, I've always looked at it, and it's not an original idea, the idea that the Gospels weren't written by the apostles, they were written about the apostles, which sort of undermines the whole argument of, why would they make statements that make them look bad? And it's because they were foils, Why would they pump up the role of women? Is because they were sympathetic to the idea that, that women had a voice in all of this. So,
yeah. Right. Let's move on, see if we can skip through a few quickly.
Maybe you should all set out to disprove the delusional belief in the resurrection, as Lee Strobel did as a journalist. Only instead of proving it wrong, he ended up converting.
I tried to prove some evolutionists wrong, and I ended up deconverting.
If he had converted to Islam, would the writer still say the same thing? If he converted to Buddhism, would the writer still say the same thing? Stories of conversions, we hear them all the time. The question is not whether someone converts through the process of research, but whether that research gives us a sound foundation to also follow suit.
Yeah, I read all of Strobel's books when I was a Christian, and his books were so poorly argued that it was part of my journey out of Christianity. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe instead of writing a book as a journalist with an opinion, maybe write it as a historian. That would be interesting. Airman, anybody?
Yeah.
Jesus is real. He is alive today through his spirit, but the point of the Gospels are to show his nature, not speak 100% literal truth.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I can agree with a little bit of that. Okay, but obviously, Matt, one of the devilish details is not speak 100% literal truth. Now we've left to parse, well, what is literal truth and what isn't literal truth? How do we read these Gospels then? You're reading these things and you're saying it's giving you the character of Jesus, but you may be reading something as literal that's not literal. So it's not actually giving you the character of Jesus. These kinds of comments aren't really helpful and instructive in reading the Gospels. Oh, I love this one.
All biases are not equal.
I'm not biased against that.
Actually, I sense a certain amount of bias in that statement.
Yeah, as a writer of someone who's written news, bias doesn't matter. What matters is the facts that you bring to the table in an argument. Everyone in a courtroom is biased, right? So we argue from a position of bias, don't care. Let's hear the case. Let's see the evidence.
Inspiring Philosophy did an excellent YouTube video on this a few weeks back.
I haven't looked. Maybe during the edit, I'll get to this point and have a look. And if I have, check the show notes. It'll be there. Does anybody know about this video?
No.
If we have to accept all presuppositions, then there is no way to know anything and every claim is equally true.
That's the problem with presuppositionalism. You're right. No one wants that one?
Hard agree.
Thumbs up. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Briley.
So this is a reference to the lovely host, Justin Briley.
You are reducing the faith by promoting these kinds of viewpoints.
Somebody didn't like the Christian guest.
Well, this is true. This is something I talked about in private. And I think that sometimes on a guest-driven show like Justin has, he wants to bring on people with books and interesting points of views and things like that. There's no way he can possibly have time to read every book and every, of a guest that he comes through. And he probably did a quick read, a nice brief, and it sketched out well. I don't think he knew just how bad this argument was. And if he did, I don't think he would have brought him on.
I get your point, but I question which viewpoint this writer was talking about. Was he talking about Matthew's viewpoint or Michael's viewpoint, Michael D's viewpoint? I'm not actually sure who he had in mind, because this writer could have very well thought that Michael did a good job. And in fact, I saw a comment that said, paraphrasing, this was a very interesting way to defend the New Testament. And we'll get to that comment maybe further down. So I'm not actually sure that this was criticism of Michael. I think it may have been the other way around. But I have no way of knowing, because the writer didn't say.
I don't see it that way, but if it is the way you see it, then this is a very defensive kind of post. But when he's saying, Brierly, you're reducing the faith. Hey, Matt.
Oh, I don't see it either way.
You are a reducer of the faith, my friend.
I don't have a dog in this fight.
Way to go, Matt.
Yeah, hallelujah. If that's the effect I have.
I think the problem with the comment is rather more general. What this person is doing is just casting a smokescreen without actually saying anything substantive. I don't think the comment matters.
Remember, this is in the live chat, so in the live chat bit, people only have time to put in a few words before it scrolls up the screen and it's gone.
It's hard to get context when looking back on a live chat.
Yeah.
People read whatever they want to see into the character of Jesus.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true, actually.
Amen. Right.
Besides, there is historical and archaeological consensus now that most of the Old Testament is man-made myth.
I wouldn't quite phrase it as strongly as that, but yeah. I think the problem here is, though, lots of people see archaeological sites and apply that as evidence for the supernatural things that are written about at that time, which is a poor way of going about history, but people do it.
Yeah, there was some archaeologists maybe a couple of decades ago now. Finkelstein, I want to say, was the first to come out with a big book that made a big splash in national news, and it was basically evidence, at least it was taken that way, that the enslavement of the Hebrews in Egypt, the Exodus, did not happen. Not only did not happen, but could not happen.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of knock-on effect from that I think biblical literalists have never fully recovered from. That said, I wouldn't go as far as to say archaeology has debunked everything in the Old Testament. It's hard to debunk everything in a book spanning that much time, but
it does most of, but yeah,
right. I think it has hit a lot of the big stuff enough so that a person would say, well, if that's not true, then I don't need to read the rest.
And again, we encounter this, that the Christian concept that all the Bible, the Old Testament and the New, were written, well, ultimately a single book, and the literary evidence it's a whole mess of books.
Yeah.
And not all of them are accepted, in various faiths. There are Jewish apocrypha as well. And certainly the Roman Catholics have chapters in their Bible that aren't in evangelical Bibles and that kind of thing. So, but to go back to the idea of archaeological consensus, I've read, and it may have been what you're referring to, David, a study that essentially with satellite technology, you can see where camel paths, migration paths used to be, trade routes, even though they're buried, under feet of sand in the Sahara. And there's little or no evidence, that the number of people, of Israel, credited to the Exodus ever spent 40 years roaming around the Sinai, before entering Canaan. And then also very little evidence, if any, of a material culture, where any Egyptian artifacts were in use in normal people's homes, when they arrived in Canaan. So
it's Israel Finkelstein, for
Okay.
Anyone who wants to look that up, by the way. And I apologize. Most of the words I want to say are in my Rolodex somewhere, but COVID brain. I'm 2 days in. I'm on some good medicine, and I feel so much better than I did a couple of days ago. If we had done this yesterday, this would have been completely incoherent, as opposed to partially incoherent.
Okay. Well, get well soon, David.
There's absolutely no question Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. And if you deny that, you deny history.
This must have been in response to something in the comments, because I certainly never said that on the show. And I don't think it was suggested that I thought that on the show.
Sort of misses the point too, doesn't it? Even if you give this writer full credit for a crucified Jesus, there's that whole 3 days later thing that still has to be addressed, right? So it sort of misses the important point that there was some ascension, some resurrection, and some eternality out there beyond space-time, or however the writer might gloss that.
Yeah, a cult leader got crucified. Yeah, it happened.
Right.
Yeah, but it's also a thing that makes it not worth engaging with. This is a statement of, this is the fact. There's no need of having a discussion. If you disagree with me, you're just wrong, and we don't need to talk. Okay, great. Then we don't need to talk. And I don't. There's no need of offering a different perspective or some of the counterfactuals that might bring even that in doubt, because this person isn't listening anyway. This is their facts, and this is their history. They don't want that messed with. So I'm happy not to mess with it.
Yeah.
Probably just virtue signaling. Anyway.
Well, I think an argument started happening in the comments because a few of them follow along a similar trend. So we'll skip through them quite quickly and then move back onto the topic.
Because the events recorded happened in real time, it is not the same as Buddha or Muhammad. You need to learn a little bit of history.
Sorry. Who wants to take that one?
What does he mean by events happening in real time?
Really trying not to laugh.
They were recorded in real time.
Who believes that?
The person who wrote it believes that. There are people who believe
even
that.
fundies don't believe that.
Yeah, they were going around with their notebooks, writing them down as it happened. That's how we can be so confident that they're actually true.
Which one of the illiterate disciples was writing it down?
4 of them.
Yeah, a third of them.
It is not a bigger miracle to have an illiterate dude write something down than it is to stand outside of space and time and speak words into his illiterate head. So it's just moving his hand for him to write something. Like, that's sort of the trivial end. After all, God is telling him what to write to then help him write it. It's just part of the trick. So yeah, I don't know. This is just crazy.
Let's boost this guy's comment to the top. I mean, honestly.
The point is, there are multiple possible explanations to account for the little bit of data we have about Jesus. None can be ruled out.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, except for the supernatural ones, we can rule them out.
We can give them all different weights based on the evidence for them.
Yeah, let's get some bays onto it.
Right. See, but this is part of the anything is possible argument. So that's the approach that a lot of people take. They have taken this approach on the SNS boards. And I just keep pulling my hair out. Anything is not possible. You can't start your Bayesian analysis or whatever kind of analysis you're doing with anything is possible, because that's a positive statement that doesn't seem to hold true at all. So no, I'm sorry. I think there are some things that can be ruled out, but if you can't rule anything out regarding this, then you can't know anything one way or the other about it. And there's no need of talking about it. Nothing can be ruled out.
Saying. Right, but I actually think that's what this person is saying. I think this person is actually saying the evidence on one side and the evidence on the other side is so equal that we can't know anything about it and maybe we should move on. I agree that we should move on. But not for those reasons.
Okay, let's move on.
Just because myths exist, it doesn't mean that there isn't one that isn't actually true. That's just not a logical conclusion. Watch inspiring philosophy on this, please.
Oh, am I going to have to go and watch that YouTube channel? Right, okay. Show some enthusiasm. Okay, I need to say that sentence again because something in it broke me.
Just because myths exist doesn't mean that there isn't one that isn't actually true.
But it's
Yes.
a myth.
It was
Okay,
worse
so-
the second time.
There's one too many
So-
isn'ts in there. Yeah.
I think we can be a little bit charitable here. I think what he's actually saying is that of all the things that we think of as myths, there's a chance that at least some of them are not myths.
Yeah.
So
Of all the crazy stories, one
You're
crazy
not
story.
Right.
Steel Manning, are you, David? Come on.
I'm doing my best. It's like the King Arthur myth. It could be true. No one thinks it is. Could be. And that's just kind of the rank Raglan scale. I don't know if you guys are familiar with rank Raglan scale. It posits various attributes of literature that you can look at a piece of literature, and if it has these attributes, it's most likely a myth. These are the things that are most common in myth. And Jesus, I hate to say this because I don't want to wake up the anti-mythicist folks. Jesus ranks very high on the rank Raglan scale, but I take the person's point, which is to say that even if you rank very high, even on something like the rank Raglan scale, it doesn't mean that we know for sure that those things aren't myth. And I agree with that. I think that we've got a good starting point to say, yeah, it's probably a myth. But I'm certain I would be surprised if we didn't miscategorize some things that we've categorized as myth.
At any rate, the events recorded in the New Testament happened in real time.
There's that
Again?
comment. I don't understand. I really don't understand what is trying to be
See,
conveyed.
everything happened in real time. It just wasn't written down in real time. I think we might be missing something here.
Yeah,
I think that's what they were trying to say. Is that, hey, you got to, this stuff was written down as it happened, so let's all agree to believe it.
which it wasn't. So,
but
let's
we
not.
know it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
So.
No, it's
Yeah, this is one where I would say just ask any of your Christian friends and let them quietly counsel you on this one. You don't have to be embarrassed on the internet about this.
yeah.
But surely there's a bigger issue here. Let's giving the writer and other similar writers of similar comments on this point, giving them all their idea. Let's just say that they're right and that Luke the chronicler was walking around behind them with with vellum and ink and recording events as they occurred systematically. Surely the question that would have to remain would be, how reliable are eyewitnesses who are wrapped up in the events and actually have a stake in the outcome? How objective are they? So even giving them full credit, and we can't, that's not actually what we have. None of us think that these events were written down as they happened. We all know that the Gospels occurred later. But even if they occurred and were written about in real time, would we be justified in 100% confidence in the stories? And the answer to that would still be no. Okay, did my best to still man it. It still doesn't wash.
No. Another spiky one.
Now I'm really beginning to wonder, how did Mike get accepted even near a printing house, let alone publish a book?
Ow.
Ow. Yeah, exactly.
I think he had a catchy title and an interesting outline, and they went with it. But
It is a catchy title.
although I've been thinking in the context of the book we wrote in response to Justin's, we could, if we were to bother to do a response to this one, we could call it So Invented.
Yeah, yes. I like it already.
Of course, the resurrection could have been made up. It wasn't. But to say it couldn't have been is poor logic.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Here's a good one.
I was an atheist for 54 years. When I did my research, I was able to rule it out with reason.
That's the person who's written all the Lee Strobel comments, isn't it?
It will.
There are over 300 references to the Messiah in the Old Testament that were fulfilled by Jesus of Nazareth. 48 of the key prophecies were selected, and the probability of a person fulfilling all 48.
I think I must have cut the rest of that sentence when I copied and pasted.
Yeah. And the other way to look at that is how we think the Gospels were written. I think the fundamentalist, presuppositionalist is going to believe that the Bible was written with the future, or the Old Testament was written with the New Testament in mind, but that the New Testament authors went back into the sources and say, let's find anything that proves any of these ideas, lends weight to them, and we'll fold it into the book and say, this was all foretold. Can't you see it?
Right. Yeah, this retrospective application of prophecy fulfillment is a real bugbear.
We also have to skip the times when Matthew, was a particular offender, would write something to the effect, and this was done or this was said to fulfill prophecy. Right. Okay. Then it kind of negates the prophecy. Yeah. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're going to read prophecy and study prophecy and then do a lot of things in your life that fulfill prophecy, and then go back and claim that prophecy has been fulfilled. This is why I personally call prophecy the deep end of the kook theological pool. Enjoy, boys and girls. There is no lifeguard.
No.
Today we see this same sort of thing. We don't have to go back to the New Testament for kooky prophecy. Years ago, back when I was deep into Christianity, there was a book written called AD 70. David, I don't know if you ever read it, but we came from the same theological school, so
I know of it. I
did
not read it.
I don't remember the author at the moment, and I'd have to dig in a dusty attic to find it, so I won't. But this book actually suggested that after AD 70, we now live after the judgment, that the judgment of the world happened in AD 70, and we now live after the judgment. Well, here's the funny thing about the AD 70 book. It had quite a cult following. There were quite a lot of people who believed that we have been judged and we live after God decided to separate the sheep and the goats. You have to do an awful lot of mental gymnastics to accept that kind of thing. The Watchtower is still being printed today. Every so often, the Watchtower, that's the Jehovah's Witnesses, folks that are unfamiliar with the Watchtower. That's a Jehovah's Witness paper. It's still being printed today. The number of times that the Watchtower has missed a prophecy, but people continue to believe and rescue these prophecies from the scrap heap of theological truth is astounding. So I'm not sure what it would take to actually make me believe that a prophecy was fulfilled. What do you guys think? Whatever the prophecy is, what would make you believe in somebody that lived outside of our lifetime? They don't have access to our technology. They don't know anything about our time, and they just predict 1,000 years in the future, or several hundred years in the future, some event. What would it take to make you believe that happened and that it's not coincidence?
A lot more than the oracular pronouncements of Nostradamus, for example, and all sorts of people see all sorts of things he predicted, into his works that are represented in the real world, and I'm not feeling it. So,
yeah, prophecy simply wouldn't be the avenue to convince me of the supernatural. So there are better avenues that a person could take from me. I don't think that prophecy could do it.
It would have to be devastatingly specific. Otherwise, if there's any room for interpretation, then it's not prophecy, and I can't.
Right, but that specificity would have to also be kept secret, so that no one could specifically fulfill it. And
Yeah,
then
you've
you
worked
would
against
always
the prophecy if you write it down and tell everybody about it, right?
exactly.
Then all of a sudden you get to manufacture a solution to the prophecy.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Here we go.
Matthew Taylor is the one who is going to die when it's his time to die. Therefore, let him live his life his way, the way he wants to, and believe what he wants.
Wait a minute, what's the alternative that they're suggesting here?
Oh, there's an alternative.
That the other guy will not die when it's
No.
his time to die?
Maybe it's that he won't necessarily be allowed to live his life, but yeah,
It says he'll die when it's his time to die. Okay, how is that not true of all of us, including Christians?
oh, except the Christians are going to live on in
They'll
a
die but not die.
afterlife. Yeah. So
I'm sorry. Pass.
No one can teach someone who believes he knows it all already.
Yep, that is
true enough.
Yep. I don't know who that was aimed at. Right, this next one is actually in response to something that I specifically said. So let's go for it.
Essenes did not believe in bodily resurrection. Pharisees did. Essenes believed in disembodied soul, a la Plato.
Now, this was in response to me saying explicitly on the show that the Essenes believed in bodily resurrection. And the reason why I said that was I found a source that said that. So I repeated the source. If I did keep the link to that source, check the show notes. Otherwise, I'll try and remember to look and see if I can re-find the source and put it in the show notes.
Memories are filled in with details by the brain, and it's often wrong.
No shit.
True.
500 resurrection eyewitnesses. We have a claim about 500 witnesses.
That person has been listening to Still Unbelievable.
They've been listening to Skeptics and Seekers at skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Log into your Discuss account and
going to edit
discuss
that
away.
right out.
Just trying to give him a clean edit point there.
And the claim of the 500 was made by Paul, the first franchisee of the new Christian religion. So I've always read that as he's puffing up the numbers with a claim there's no way to check.
Right.
Is
And
this one of those numbers where it's men only and we need to add the women and children to that number?
Oh, yeah. Then it's like 800, maybe 1,000.
Well, the beautiful thing about this claim, and I always liked Paul's stones for making this claim, he appeared to 500 people at once, and many are still around today. And the Christians say, you see, he would never say that if it wasn't true. And I respond to them very quickly. Great. Can you tell me any of their names? Where do they live? Where would anyone who was following this, who wanted to follow that up, how exactly from the text of this claim would they follow up to see if this was true?
Yep.
They can't. But the Christian looks at that and says, you see, proof. He said they were alive today.
Actually, what I think is interesting about that claim, and I've asked this in the past, is where is the parallel story? So, okay, look, I don't want people to name somebody that was with Paul. I don't care, because that doesn't advance the ball at all. You can say, see, there were these 500 people and they saw it, and Paul can tell us who they are. And here's what Paul said. There was Joe over there in the little house with the grass door, and here was this scribe over here that followed Paul out of Judaism. See, here are the people that Paul says. I don't care. Where's the parallel account, and how can we verify it?
Because none of the 500 wrote. You would
That's what I
think
mean.
that,
Exactly.
just like the 12 apostles, they were shortened to the 12. Some would even say there were never 12 apostles, but it was more of a nickname, the 12. We never hear of the 500. Oh, and there's Papias, one of the 500. That's never there. The gospel writers don't know who these guys are. The fools calling themselves Peter or 1st and 2nd John or Jude don't know who these guys are. And those guys, none of them could write. So they didn't know they were one of the 500 either. So it's just one of those claims. It's just out there. I used to use an example of during 9/11, I was in the New York area, and when the planes hit the building, I actually levitated up to one of the high floors, and I saved several people, and 5,000 people witnessed it. Prove me wrong. You can't. My story stands.
And to expand on both your points, the idea that Paul knows of 500 resurrection eyewitnesses, the idea that he wouldn't tell that story. He was a publicity hound. He was crazy for proving the new faith. And the idea that he knew, I was there and I saw it, or I talked to them and here's what Jesus said. It feels like it's too good a story to have passed up. And yet it's just like, hey, I know 500 other guys who saw him too.
It's really interesting.
Leave it to this Brady guy to just swoop in and make a better. I hate this guy so much.
That's a really interesting point that he's a publicity hound, right? Because in order for him to even become an apostle, according to the story, right, he has a better story to. All you guys, you walked around with Jesus and you talked to him and all of that sort of thing. But I'm so special that he chose me on a dirt road to Damascus. So he's publicity. Really good point.
The illiteracy thing is an issue, and no evidence people remembered things better long, long ago.
So this is in the referencing to the bit about in the conversation where Mike and I had a little bit of a back and forth about memory and the quality of memory, and me repeating what experts in the field have said about memory is no better ages ago than it is now, contrary to what many Christians want us to believe.
Yeah, the great thing about that memory claim is it's completely unfalsifiable. So let's say that they did have this superhuman memory, and they could remember these long documents word for word. How would you know? Because the documents weren't written down. We lost the documents, and so how would you know that it was written down word for word? Exactly. You can't prove it. You can't go back and look it up. So it's one of those claims that Christians just get to make, and it goes in the file of yet another unfalsifiable Christian claim.
Yeah.
Although Uncle Bart did a pretty good job of synthesizing the literature on it, and I forget the name of the book on that topic, but
I can almost come up with it.
I've got it on a shelf, but it's in the other room.
It was good though, because he spent a lot of time exploring, pulling apart memory and whether first century A&E people might have had. In fact, he went further back than that. I think he went all the way back into Jewish tradition, the sort of mouth to ear. And oh man, I wish I could remember the book too. The next question, Matthew, is on this same point.
Cognitive dissonance theory alone is one of many ways to account for the Gospels.
I'm not sure I understand that.
I'm of two minds about it. So.
No, really, that was funny.
He's cutting you out anyway. Why are you still talking?
I would like to explain the joke.
Right.
I would explain the joke so that, people realize how funny it was, is all.
You're just being mean to me. That's okay. Look, I don't know enough. Do either of you, other than David, know anything about cognitive dissonance theory? I don't. David,
I wonder if they're using it.
Hard pass.
I just wonder if they're using it to explain why the Gospels are different. Which is they're similar but not exactly the same. I don't know if that's where the writer was coming.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
they all saw the same thing, but they tell the story slightly differently because of cognitive dissonance.
Or it could be a different kind, like they had an expectation that Jesus was going to be the Messiah, but he was killed. And so now they had to come up with some kind of story in their mind to reconcile the fact that they've got a dead Messiah on their hands. And so that pushes them to say, yes, but he's victorious in death. Cognitive dissonance having them create a new story. I mean, I don't know. That's the best I can do with that.
I like that idea better, David.
So anything scientists say that Mike doesn't agree with or doesn't play in his favor, it's their assumption. So convenient.
That's probably off the back of the same thing about the memory conversation that we had.
Or the experts.
Well, yeah.
That's the problem.
Sorry, same subject.
Yeah, this goes back to his repeated phrase, supernatural bias. And so he would often just dismiss scientific consensus by saying, yeah, but they started off with a supernatural bias.
It's unhelpful if you're going to enter any kind of conversation with people and accuse the other person of being biased against your preferred conclusion.
Versus Bart Ehrman debate on the transmission of the texts is a good one.
I'm not a great person for debates. I'm not particularly a debate format fan, but if it's really that good, I might make an exception.
Yeah, the challenge with different groups of people watching these debates is, and I don't remember the outcome of this one, but the idea that I'd watch it and probably go, "Ooh, Bart cleaned the floor with Dr. White," and the Christians would go, "Wow, James White really showed Bart his stuff," So it's like it could be good in either direction. But again, that's a lot of my thought around, the role of the Gospels and how they were created and transmitted, came from reading essentially everything that Bart Ehrman has written. So
I would like the debate for entertainment purposes because both of those guys are really good at the craft. Mm-hmm. But this is part of the problem with debates and philosophy in general for me, which is I'm not a master debater, people, and I'm not
You've been blocked, Andrew.
and
we've arrived.
And I'm not a philosopher, and so you can beat me.
Oh, stop.
No, come on. Okay, I can't even finish this now. You can defeat me in a debate, and you can out-philosophize me. It doesn't mean that you have the better point. It just means that you're a better arguer, or you are better than me that day. If you want to just have some fun, waste one of your days. I've done this many times. Just watching, just binging. Does God exist? Debates. You will never run out of them. I promise. And what you will see is a pattern. Sometimes God exists. Sometimes God doesn't. It depends on the day and who's debating and how good they were. And so it doesn't actually point you toward truth. So I think that James White and Bart Ehrman, it would be highly entertaining. I don't know how much you'd learn from it, but it would be fun.
Yes, quite. And the point I would make on that is the reason you don't find truth in debates, and the evidence of that is scientists don't work out what the result of an experiment is with a debate.
That's Matthew Taylor at his best, boys and girls.
Okay, here we are. Probably my favorite comment of the whole comment section. It makes my chest thump. Oh, it's awesome.
Matthew seems very emotional and sad. Wah, wah, wah. He seems to want someone to make him a Christian again and gets very angry if they don't.
I had that impression too, but I didn't want to say it out loud.
We worry about you, Matthew.
Oh, thank you.
But hey, man, look, you do not have to be angry with us that we cannot turn you back into a Christian. This is easy. It's easy for you to become a Christian again. I don't know why you haven't already done it. All you have to do is ask Jesus into your heart, and he will fill you with the gift of the Holy Spirit, and you too can reclaim your place in heaven right now.
I almost lost my tea.
You're drinking tea?
Yes, I am.
What, are you, an Englishman?
I'm hoping to become an honorary Englishman.
Oh, Jesus, dude, I'm drinking beer.
No,
I don't drink beer. I mean, the only alcoholic beverage I drink is NyQuil. It's the best part of having a cold.
So, Matthew, I want to say on air what I said when I read this comment, and then you and I talked about it in the show, because I think that whoever reads this or whoever thought the same way as this writer, I want to provide a different perspective if people decide to click on the show notes and watch the debate. The only place that I thought you showed any sort of emotion that was, above the background emotion of the debate, if you will, was when you were talking about Zambia and the fact that some of your family history had been taken and used as a platform to talk about Christian miracles. And I noticed that you were very slightly more emotional there. I thought it was quite appropriate. I think that it is despicable that a set of facts that didn't include a miracle were eventually taken as a way to promote modern miracles. And after those few moments in the early part of the show were over, I didn't hear any more of that out of you. I thought it was appropriate at the time. I thought that it left when it should have for the debate. I honestly didn't see it the way this post suggested.
It's just the opposite. Matt was so disarming from the first word. He oozed the kind of charm that I wish I could fake. He has an easy laugh, a natural smile, but he's British. So there's just the natural sadness of not being an American, but I didn't associate that with not being a Christian. It just seems like kind of a mean-spirited comment, or someone who just has not spent more than 30 seconds watching Matthew, because he is not a melancholy kind of person. And this comment seems so far afield. It just feels mean-spirited.
My calmness is obviously hateful.
You're creating cognitive dissonance.
I like that. Yes. Right. Well, since Andrew set it up, let's go to probably one of my least favorite. So we've gone from one extreme to the other. This comment suffers a little bit from missing the point, but let's see if we can dig that out.
Matthew brings up the tragic story in his family that perhaps makes him hate the church. I think this would be much more interesting as a show if Matthew would talk about that family story.
Yeah, that is saved for special places on special occasions. David, where can people go if they want to hear about that family story?
Oh my, Skeptics and Seekers.squarespace.com. Log in your Discuss account, discuss away. This is Matt talked about this on the last 4S that we did up to this point. It was a great show. It was a great show before this. And then he told this story, and then it became a historic show. And so you should listen to the show, skip the rest of it, and just listen to the last 10 minutes. It was so impactful. And even though I've heard the bones of this story several times, I finally understood. And I was as moved as Matthew by the time it was done. I resent, though, the implication in here that this is why Matthew hates the church. This is the root of Matthew's hatred. You see, he doesn't have a good reason to be a non-believer. It's just this personal thing that happens, and so he hates God, and so we should be able to pick at that scab and show why Matthew is a disingenuous actor here. Screw you, Mr. or Mrs. Commenter. Screw you.
Andrew, Michael, do you want to pick that up?
There is no way to top that.
Okay.
Had evidence, you wouldn't need faith.
Yeah. Down to the final comment of the live chat, and then we're going to get into the under video chat. So the final comment of the live chat, you're going to enjoy it. You're going to love it.
I think Matthew is a poor guest for this show, as I'm actually interested in what Mike has discovered. I'd like to hear from him only, or someone else who is a believer but with a different view.
If you can listen to that debate and actually write that comment, you heard a different debate than I heard. You have, and by the way, he wrote a whole book. You can actually go and buy his book and hear from him and his, I use this word as charitably as possible, philosophy right now. The worst, that has my vote as worst comment of the bunch.
So I don't understand the last part of his comment. Brady, you can see things more clearly than I can most of the time. So he says, I'd like to hear from him only. I get that. Or someone else who is a believer, but with a different view.
Well,
I don't understand what he's looking for.
Matthew's counterpoints, to the book, we're harshing this fellow's buzz.
Okay, but what does he want a believer to do then?
To put a slightly different view on, it's just a different perspective on something that they could both agree is probably true.
Okay, so he wants a Christian on Christian debate or a Christian on Christian love fest. I'm not sure what he's asking for.
He wants the same destination but via a different road.
I see.
But I'm not from the South. But I believe the phrase that would apply to this case is "bless your heart."
I can attest this is an appropriate application.
Oh dear. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's the end of part 1 of the show. Part 2 now is all the comments that went under the main video. So these are comments that are in no particular chronological order. People dumped them down. People replied to people. Longer comments as well. And so we'll carry on as before. Use this interlude with the Twinkie music. Somebody sing. No, nobody sing. Refill your glass or whatever, and we'll carry on. Right.
All the other creation myths are just as unusual and unbelievable, so they must be true.
That was the nature of comment I've had from most people when I've talked about this book.
Hard agree. I agree with the sentiment.
Mike's main argument seems to be that he believes the claims of the Bible are true because he really wants to believe the claims in the Bible are true.
I wouldn't have put it quite so simply, but there is a little whiff of that kind of circularity at places.
I'm reminded that other folks have said, that seeing is believing, but there's another strong element. The inverse is also true. Believing is seeing. And I think Mike finds in the Bible a story that he already believes and has written a book attempting to support it.
The fact that there are spurious claims of miracles today and the fact that miracles are not a common observable occurrence do nothing to disprove the eyewitness claims of Jesus' miracles in the Bible. A true miracle should be a very rare thing indeed.
Now, this touches on something that I see an awful lot, and Frank Turek loves to tweet about this. Miracles are true and wonderful and special because they are exceedingly rare, and God uses them really sparingly. Like when a plane crashes and one person survives, or a building collapses in an earthquake and one person survives.
Sounds like anti-natural bias to me.
Yeah, I actually agree with the first part of this. Just because you can prove that 99 miracles are false claims doesn't mean that there isn't one claim that's true. So again, no one is actually arguing against that. The second part of this, though, I have never understood this. A true miracle should be a very rare thing. Why does rareness have to coincide with true miracle? I mean, if I were a magical creature, I'd be doing miracles every day. It wouldn't make them less magical. The number of times you do it, it doesn't make it not miraculous, does it?
I think there's another problem here, though, and it's a bigger problem for me. Maybe this is what you were driving at. I don't know, but I don't think so. So this idea that false miracles today don't disprove miracles of the first century. I think I have a little bit of a problem with that. I'll tell you why. If we can fake giving someone a new limb, or if we can fake healing someone's vision, or if we can fake water into wine, or if we can fake resurrection, etc., 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 ad infinitum, what it does tell me is that the kinds of claims made in the New Testament are the kinds of claims that can be faked and people will believe them today. And what that says to me is that while it is possible that some miracle happened in the New Testament, the very fact that it can be faked today says something about the nature of the kind of miracle that God should perform. So what is that? God, if he does miracles, should perform the kind of miracle that we can't fake. You might reasonably say, but Andrew, we seem to be able to fake any kind of thing that you can imagine. Oh, not my problem. Not my problem. The fact that the miracles of God can be faked in a way that seems genuine is a problem for first century miracles, in my view.
I think it's a problem if you're trying to prove that a miracle happened. So I don't think you can prove that a miracle happened in the past. I'm just dealing with a strict philosophical idea of simply because you've disproven every modern miracle claim doesn't necessarily entail that no miracle ever happened.
Right. No. Right. So the thing that I'm after here is, can we learn something probabilistically about the likelihood of miracles based on the degree of false ones that we can find?
If all we do is go back to the historical documents, the Gospels, I don't know. I've never counted how many, if these are supposed to be rare, how many miracles was Jesus credited with in the Gospels alone? And he was credited as being a healer and a miracle worker, so he's probably doing it more than once, not just the stories we were told. So he was cranking out miracles left and right. That's part of the cool part of the story. But the other piece is, in those days, all sorts of people were doing miracles or claiming to do miracles. There were faith healers left and right. He was regarded, I think, as just another faith healer by some. So the idea that, well, first, I think the standard for miracles was different at that time, but also, and the nature of healing. Again, if it's supposed to be rare, it'd be interesting to know what the commenter thinks. Which of the rare miracles is, well, they'll tell us that the resurrection's the most important one. Everything from turning water into wine to walking on water to healing blind people has essentially all sorts of stuff. If it's rare, he certainly was punching out a bunch of them.
Yeah.
That is interesting. In fact, miracles happened around him without his free will input. So that's the lady with the issue of blood, right? Jesus, look, this is not my fault, folks. I didn't make this story up. Jesus is wandering through a throng of people, and a woman walks up behind him and touches the hem of his garment, and he feels power go out of him. He's doing miracles when he's not willing it to happen. She just touches the hem of his garment and she's healed. So it certainly makes it seem to me that miracles actually weren't rare, that this is the sort of thing that happened around Jesus all the time. I just think that this is a sort of special pleading about miracles. It is a way to salvage the idea of miracles and the hope that there were miracles in the first century without having to address the sparsity of actual miracles and the evidence for them.
Right. And if miracles are that rare, are we supposed to ignore Craig Keener's big 2-volume Big Book of Miracles? The miracle
you
plays?
Should, but not
Short answer, yes. Right.
Yeah. So it's always just been a very strange thing when Christians say, oh, yes, miracles are rare. Really? Because that's not what you were claiming yesterday.
Yeah. Right, we've got somebody here who put 5 points into a single comment, so I'll go through them one at a time quite quickly. Some of them cover stuff that we've touched on.
Good show, a few comments. 1. Most skeptics do not think that the Jesus stories were simply made up. Rather, they grew over time from a kernel of reality, and so are more aptly described as legend rather than myth. So all the stuff about Jewish expectations, etc., really only applies to mythicists.
And this was a point that I was trying to make on the show, and I'm glad somebody picked up on it and made the comment.
Number 2, verisimilitude is in the eyes of the beholder. One could make the same argument for much of Mallory's Morte d'Arthur, which we know is mostly the product of legendary development.
Yep.
Agreed.
Hey, great.
Miracles. The rejection of miracles evidenced only by testimony is a conclusion from the probabilities rather than a presupposition. We have never recorded a single breach of the second law of thermodynamics. That law is confirmed trillions upon trillions of times per second. One certain breach would mean that the law no longer exists. So breach is enormously improbable, and testimony, even if first-hand and based on careful observation, is not sufficient to establish it. But the stories we have aren't even first-hand, and they are mutually contradictory.
Yes. All right. No argument. Okay.
The stories of Jesus originated in an enormously superstitious age among people, particularly Jews, who were immersed in magical practices. This isn't the sort of context from which we could reasonably accept testimony of miracles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hard yes. I just wanted to jump in on this one to say that the Bible is so full of magic, it's almost embarrassing. And the Christian has a little bit of a problem with the magic in the Bible. It's not just the New Testament, it's also the Old Testament. Because you had Moses doing magic, and you had the Egyptian priests also doing magic. In the story, it's real magic. It's not coming from God. You've got the necromancer who could actually talk to the dead, who could actually summon Samuel. Actual magic, not coming from God. You've got the lady, you can find her in Acts. She was doing real magic, not from God. And so the Bible is full of magics all around. So this is actually quite a problem for the Christian. They have to explain where all of this other magic came from.
The devil, obviously.
Number 5 from this comment. Copies of the Bible documents in the Dead Sea Scrolls differ in some place from the received text. The text of Lamentations from Qumran differs by about 1/8 in length.
That seems quite a significant proportion of length. And again, this is something that I made reference to when during the show as well, because Mike references it, I think, in chapter 2 of his book.
Mike in this video has some of the worst apologetics I've ever seen.
At the risk of repeating Michael Brady, 4 thumbs up.
Right. Worth chiming in on just to say, hard agree. Those kinds of apologetic arguments do not help Christians, especially the ones that are the more academic Christians who are trying to reshape the conversation and provide Christians with better arguments. This sets them back a lot.
Yeah. In the brief email conversation that Mike and I had post-show, he did actually reference this comment. And he said, OK, I'm still a newbie at this. I'm here to learn. And I think that's why he's being very happy to engage this kind of thing. He wants to have practice and get better.
Well, OK, but can I say this isn't the stage for newbies? Because you're on one of...
I'm a newbie.
No, you're not. You're absolutely not. But also, there's a matter of consequences. If you fall on your face, you're just a stupid atheist anyway. It doesn't matter. Who's that going to hurt? Is it going to hurt the cause of atheism? There's no cause of atheism. You get a guy like Mike, and he is arguing for the truth of Christianity. There are a lot of people on the bubble listening to Mike. He created many atheists, I'm convinced, that day.
OK, miracles. Here you go.
Study electrons. You soon know that miracles are possible.
All right, I'm going to take this first. The thing that I think this whole comment turns on is the word study. Study electrons, and you will soon know that miracles are possible. Well, the trouble is we can't actually study miracles, can we? You see, when you study an electron, you can study its ground state. You can study excitation. You can study the idea that electrons flow from points of greater to lesser potential. We can determine how to store electrons. We can determine how to transmit them. We can actually measure the amount of work that an electron does. And back in 2008, scientists successfully, for the first time, manipulated a single electron in the way that we usually talk about miracles, in the way that Christians talk about them. It is God doing a thing from behind the curtain. God is doing a thing that we can't actually study. We have no idea, for instance, how Jesus might have turned water to wine, or how a God outside of space and time raised someone from the dead. And so the very idea that we can study electrons, I think, separates it from anything that might be miraculous.
Study electrons and you'll soon learn more about science.
Fundamentalism is not Christianity. It often leads to atheism because it is more tenable to fundamentalism. For a very erudite account about the existence of Jesus, I would recommend Bart Ehrman's Did Jesus Exist?, a book by an ex-Christian atheist. For the atheist who fails to see atheism as another belief system because it happens to occur with the dominant paradigm of materialism, I recommend David Bentley's excellent book, Atheist Delusions. He is also critical of fundamentalist Christianity and has stated that Christianity has never been tried. What atheists reject is usually not Christianity, but a travesty of Christianity that deserves to be rejected.
Okay.
No true Scotsman.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Justin also introduced me as somebody who believes that Jesus existed. I also never at any point in that show suggested that Jesus didn't exist. Just a point. My response when anybody rolls this kind of thing out is, okay, feel free to describe your approved version of Christianity and we'll see what response I have to that. Right, okay, here we go. Somebody likes me.
It seems to me that Matthew is making two key errors here. The first is the assumption that science can prove miracles.
I don't assume that.
Miracles, however, would generally be written off by science as anomalous, so you can never be able to prove a miracle with science.
Okay.
This comes from the very bias he denounces through the program that naturalism must be true.
I don't think I said that.
The second error is the fallacy of assuming that things that happened in the past must happen now.
That's fair.
This is an assumption which doesn't hold on any view and really frustrates naturalism. A great example of this might be Byzantine fire. We can't replicate it, therefore it never existed.
I would never say that.
This obvious nonsense really highlights the issue with his epistemology. Worse so, he ends up seemingly combining the two so that because we can't currently replicate it with science, miracles don't happen. But by this, he sets up a no-loss scenario because you can be sure that if we could replicate it by science, he would declare there would be no need of God for a miracle. By this, we see that Matthew has set himself up in a worldview where his bias protects him from ever needing to consider an alternative because any evidence for the alternative is actually evidence towards his instead.
Boy, this person really knew you well, didn't they?
Yeah, that smells of I'm going to tar you with the brush which I've been tarring myself with.
While twisting yourself into a pretzel.
Yes. Okay, there is something to pick out through from here. I don't think I said science can prove miracles, but what I did say was something along the lines of, because I am not convinced that miracles happen today, I have no reason to believe that they happened in the past. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to take.
So there's another bit here because we do actually have quite good tools of looking into the past, whether it's astronomy or archaeology or anthropology, whether it's radiometric dating. I mean, we can go on and on about the ways that we look into the past. And what we see, with some notable exceptions, is that events in the past appear to unfold in the way that they unfold today. And so it seems parsimonious to say we don't appear to observe miracles today. And because events in the past appeared to unfold in the same way that they do today, based on the amount of work that we can do through science, technology, engineering, and math, because yesterday seems to be parsimonious with today, the questions that we ask about today seem to apply equally well to yesterday.
There is also something else that this commenter is completely missed about some of what I was saying about accepting miracles under appropriate evidence. There is a scenario where a repeatable miracle that we can't do medically, let's say, for example, because this one comes up an awful lot, the growing back of limbs. If every amputee in the world was lined up and we got someone consistently growing their arms back through a command and it was happening there and then, we could video it and we could watch it happen, amputee after amputee after amputee down the long line. That would convince me that there was something unnatural happening, because we have no natural mechanism to explain how that could happen. So this would, by definition, be something that is not natural. This commenter is flatly wrong about this scenario, which I hold for myself.
Yeah, Matt, you and I, we just did a show on miracles.
Where can people find it?
You know, I feel like this is a trick question at this point.
I'm doing the editing of this show, just so you know that.
You're just looking for another clean edit point. Skeptics and Seekers, that's squarespace.com. The thing is, why do Christians keep bringing philosophy to a miracle fight? Just shut the hell up and do the damn miracle. It's stupid to argue about the philosophy of miracles. No one gives a damn. Just do the miracle, you win.
Yeah.
And if we're still denying it after you done raised up a graveyard full of dead people, we just fools. Okay? So forget all the philosophizing. You don't need it. And the reason they do all of this philosophizing and attempting to paint you as, you know, someone with an unbreakable bias is because they can't bring the goods. They don't have a miracle at the end of the day. All they can do is prove that you have a bias. Well, let me help you out, Christians. I have an anti-miraculous bias. But you have the trump card. You've got a deck full of 52 aces, and you only need one of them. So just shut the fuck up and do the miracle.
Matthew, we've got some new listeners based on the numbers that we're seeing. For the last couple of years, we have offered a challenge here on Still Unbelievable. I, in fact, am an amputee. And since we started this show, I have offered this challenge not only to Christians, but people of all religions all over the world. If you know a healer and you think that healer can heal me, I will go anywhere in the world or bring the healer to me. I will participate in any ritual. I will pray any prayer. I will read any book. I will follow any directions. If you think your faith healer can heal me. And so there is your challenge. From me to you. You have a willing participant right now to demonstrate that you worship the one true God, whoever it is. And that one true God can reach into the gears of this universe and change its direction. And you may say, but Andrew, God doesn't heal those that don't believe in him. Fine. I live in an extended network of amputees. I know people who are missing both eyes. I know people who are missing both hands and both feet. I know people who are missing just an arm or a leg. I know people who are born with catastrophic birth defects, who are in fact Christians. So this only applies to Christians now. You can get the job done to set me on the road to belief, and you can help a Christian.
I love the miracle conversation so much. I wish I could just do a podcast about the miracle conversation because it's so easy. It's such low hanging fruit. And we could run this telethon, you and I, all day. Heck, we don't even have to go into the bench of the people we know. I mean, I've got family members who are amputees, like in my own house. But just the things that are personally wrong with us. We could start a telethon for that. This is so easy, and the Christian has zero response. Andrew, we've been doing this roadshow for what, 8 years now? It seems like for a long time. This just shuts up the Christian. There's not even a bad response. I've tried not to scare them away too much. I just want them to acknowledge that the ball is in their court. We have both been willing to pray. We have both done it. We have both. I'm willing to believe whatever you can show me. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the kit. Andrew will be tougher than me because he knows more science than I do. I'm a caveman compared to Andrew. You can fool me. Come and fool me. It's a low bar. Just shut up and do the thing. No one will do it, and they won't even comment on it. The conversation is just shut down. I feel like we just shut it down. Hey, Matthew Brady, everyone has heard Andrew and I do this for 8 years. What say you?
Well, I go back. There's one sentence in this paragraph-long response that resonates with me. And it reads, because you can be sure that if we could replicate it by science, he would declare there's no need for God to do a miracle. And that's dead on. He admitted it himself. And then the idea that any number of the apparent mental health problems that Jesus of Nazareth was credited with faith healing can be treated with modern medicine. So no need for those miracles. Leprosy, or the scourge of the Old and New Testament, can be treated with antibiotics. I guess that's where we end up with God of the gaps, is the gaps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And miracles, I think most of the philosophy of miracles is to explain why they don't happen when people would expect them to happen or when they were promised to happen.
Matthew, if you'll give me 30 more seconds, there is an update.
Okay.
I promise I will be fast. For the new listeners, a few months ago, I was at the park with my daughter, who just came in the room, by the way. We're at the park, and there's a lady there, very nice older lady. She's from Ukraine, actually. When she met me, this is the first day we met. This little park that we visit has a nice little lake. And she noticed, because it is noticeable, that I'm visually impaired. So she asked if she could pray. Well, because my daughter was playing with her granddaughter, I didn't want to sour that. And I said, sure. So she takes me over and sits me down on the park bench. And she asks me to close my eyes. And then she puts her hands on me. And she prays in either Russian or Ukrainian. I can't tell the difference. They sound very much the same to my ear. But she was trying to cast out the demons. That word's that cognate was quite clear. She tries to cast the demons out that are keeping me from being able to see. And it had the predictable result of I still am legally blind and missing an eye. Now, she said to me right there on the park bench, well, maybe you will be healed when you wake up tomorrow morning. This is not a Saturday Night Live skit. I promise you, folks, this is how it happened. I've talked about it in previous episodes. So that's for the new folks. Here's the update for everyone that's been following this particular story for the last couple of months. She now no longer comes to the park. Her granddaughter comes with her mother, but she doesn't come when I'm there. We go at a regular time every day that we go. And I am sure to some degree that her absence is because her failure to heal me is either a direct challenge to her God or because I am filled with some sort of evilness that she doesn't want to associate with. So the update is that she will now not even speak to me. She won't even be in the same place I am. So there you go. Sorry, Matthew, I think that was longer than 30 seconds, but that's the update.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I'm saddened by that because there's obviously some pride. I'm going to diagnose from a distance, but I'm going to guess there's some pride there that is causing her some embarrassment, so she just can't be seen with you. Which I think there's a sadness there that she could just say, I'm sorry I did that thing, and things could carry on.
The thing that I appreciate is that her granddaughter and my daughter still play together. So, that's a success. Yeah. Fellas, this section has run on. I'm sorry. Most of that was my fault, but I'll blame it on David.
Right. Okay, let's move on. Another spiky one coming up. This one's really quite harsh, actually.
This author does a terrible job even defending his own book. I feel I could have done a better job.
Was this one of you two moonlighting on here?
Thank goodness for the interviewer stating the clarity of his arguments in his book. The arguments he's making are sound when presented properly, but he's doing a terrible job.
Actually, I'm gonna be charitable here because I've been probably the most harsh on Mike, and I would say that I agree with this poster that someone else could have done a better job with the material, and I think it shows that Mike is new, and he may have been a little bit nervous on this stage. He may not have given the best theoretical performance that he could have given. He knew that he was going to have some backup with Justin in his corner. The problem is I don't think it was a particularly good book. So it doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. You can still read a good book that's full of crap. I appreciate good books, well-written books, and I just don't think it was well argued even in the book. But it is true that I think if you brought on some other Christian apologist who was really good at this stuff, Torek, you mentioned earlier, I think that someone else could have done a better job and made a better case, and that's just not what we got. Hell, I think that he could make a better case if he had a chance to do it again. So
I didn't find the points any more convincing when Justin repeated them than when Mike said them, frankly. So I disagree with that part, at least.
I didn't say that Justin was the one who could make a better case.
My concern with going on and having a conversation with, say, someone like, let's say his name again, Frank Turek, who is a master at bamboozling and slip sliding verbally, he would go off on a rant, go off on a tangent, go round the houses, say some different things, then come back very superficially to the original point and say, ha, answer that. And you've got such a complex trail of breadcrumbs to unpack before you actually get to the really bad point at the end. You've failed before you've even started, but it's not because the point is good, it's because the maze is confusing.
Right. I would also say this of Mike's work. These weren't really his arguments. This was a hodgepodge of arguments that seem to have been put together over the years from other people. And I think this justifies the observation that other people could have made the arguments better, because other people have made the arguments better. And so he's just kind of rehearsing arguments that aren't necessarily his original work. But I wouldn't want him to be discouraged by it. I would actually hope that he goes back and tries again and maybe does some original development. And that's as charitable as I can be there.
Okay.
What evidence does this atheist need? Do any of them ever get specific?
I've got some podcasts I could recommend.
Well, yeah. What evidence do they need? What claims are they making? So wouldn't it depend on what claims they're making?
I can tell you what evidence I need. I've done this before. Done it repeatedly. Here, I'm still.
Okay.
If you want me to believe in your God, this is pretty easy, because whether you have a being that can turn water to wine or raise somebody from the dead or whatever, I don't care about any of that. That's not actually the thing that you want me to believe. What you want me to believe is that the God that does those tricks is a God who can make something out of nothing, a God that can live forever, a God that has the ability to separate the just from the unjust by drawing a perfect line between them. You want me to believe that there is a heaven that I get granted if I do all the right things, and a hell or annihilation if I don't. And if you want me to believe those things, then those are the claims that you have to back. And that is the evidence that I need. Now, there's some philosophy in this that makes this a little tricky. David Hume gets involved here, and he says, look, it's always more likely that you were deceived than that an actual miracle occurred. I'm not saying that I can't be deceived. I readily acknowledge that I can be. But we're not talking about whether I can be deceived. We're talking about whether I can be convinced, and about what has to be done to convince me. And to convince me of a particular idea, like a heaven, you can't hide it and say, oh, well, if you go shopping, you get halfway there, God will give you the rest as a reward. But you have to demonstrate to me that there's a heaven there as a reward. And just saying that there is not enough. Michael Brady, what do you think? What would convince you?
But the only thing I've ever been able to come up with, I think I've used it in the comments back when we had them below Justin's show. I don't know what would convince me, but the God you just described would know what would convince me. And yeah, it's not there. So
I misread the question here, and I apologize. This is a matter of starting points for me. So the Christian, especially the academic Christian, they try to have a starting point with apologetics. Let me tell you, the cosmological argument or the ontological argument is not a conversation starter for me. I am tremendously bored by such a conversation. It will never end in a place that makes me want to go to the next step, which is ask about Jesus or whatever. So it's just a dead end. The Christian, if they want to have a persuasive conversation, pick a different starting point, and we've already talked about it. Just do a damn miracle. Let's start there. Let's start with the fact that you are a good representative of this God who can raise dead people. So do one of those and convince me there, because that's easy. There are lots of things that you can do there that would convince me that you just did something natural. That is a very interesting starting point for a conversation right there. Instead of doing that, though, if you want to start with a cosmological argument, though, and then complain that there's nothing that you could say that would convince me, that's on you.
Yeah.
Ever seen Star Wars? What makes him think that stories can't be fantastically constructed to suit the times?
Yeah, metachlorians, man.
Okay, long one coming up.
The argument from cynics that since it can't be proven through natural explanation, it's not possible.
I didn't say that.
Seems like a strong argument when you're dealing with many of the miracles in the Bible, since it's pretty easy to counter-argue, I don't think they happened because I haven't seen similar things. Given how long ago they were and the fact that they would be supernatural events, thereby make it impossible to explain with natural explanations. It can be hard to prove it, or even make an argument other than they were mentioned in the Bible.
Well, that's all you got.
And the one that I personally find impossible to overcome is the resurrection of Christ, which is why I think Paul's emphasis in the scripture on it is so significant. Christ's life, crucifixion, and death is almost universally accepted by believers.
Yes.
And none.
Really?
When it comes to the resurrection, now, I have not heard a single secular argument that better explains everything that happens after that event other than Christ literally coming back from the dead.
It was all fiction?
That was a huge tipping point for me. When I was wrestling with my faith, despite all my best efforts to generally seek out a better explanation, I couldn't find one that even came close. Once that one sunk in, so many of my other deeply held hesitations came crumbling down. There you are, so just believe.
Yeah, Jesus wasn't the only person in literature that came from the dead. So so let's just grant you that Jesus Christ came from the dead. I don't know how you prove that, but at the end of the day, what does that prove? There are Hindus today that are getting reincarnated from people that lived thousands of years ago. So should I be a Hindu? I don't find the argument compelling that one man came from the dead once upon a time out of stories full of people coming back from the dead. It doesn't resonate with me.
No. there's a basic flaw in the middle of this spiel, and that's the assumption which too many Christians make, that the writings in the New Testament, especially post the resurrection, are all absolutely true, are events that actually really did happen. And as soon as you start to accept the possibility that they might be fiction for one reason or another, then you immediately get to much, much more likely explanations than some dude was resurrected 3 days later.
This person makes some allusion to everything that happened, talking about the portrayal of the gospel and the life of Jesus and the leading up to the death, burial, and resurrection. This person says, when I understood all that happened. Well, okay, or worse, I don't think we know all that happened. I don't find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, well, and the first chapter of the book of Acts, to be a particularly good representation of what might have happened. And so while I understand how this person got to their eventual conclusion that the story of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus was an actual set of events, and that they're living a life that will hopefully grant them a home in heaven at some point in the future, I don't find the New Testament to be a credible set of documents. And I don't think we know all that happened. And so I can't reach the same conclusion.
Yeah, single secular argument. Okay, how about grief hallucinations and the bandwagon effect? I imagine among the followers of Jesus at the time, if a few of them, any of them had said, I saw Jesus, there'd be a certain number of them would probably say, yeah, me too. But again, the idea that grief hallucinations happen, they happen all the time. They happen today. They're not miracles, though. And then the other piece is, if you read the stories closely, the different appearances, as reported on the road to Emmaus, two of them encountered a man who they didn't recognize, spent a day with him, had dinner with him, and all of a sudden, hey, it's Jesus. Again, this idea of the story isn't even consistent. It's not like he showed up. In some places, he's got the holes, and the all the injuries that occurred, and then he's got others, he just showed up walking through a wall, and other times it was like we didn't even know it was him until later. It's pieced together. And because I think it was an important story to people at the time. But it doesn't have to be true in order, even for the people who, if they initially reported it that way, it doesn't have to be true for them to have believed it. Could make it as true as anyone could hope.
Yeah.
Matthew, I've come up against a hard limit. We are a ways into this, and I am completely out of time. So
okay.
I am going to have to do the socially sort of ugly thing, and I'm going to have to bow out. Michael, thank you for joining us on Still Unbelievable. I have looked forward to this since I knew that you were willing to come on the show.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I appreciate being invited, and it was really nice talking with you again.
You too. I hope that we get to do it again. David, as always, I appreciate being able to share a mic with you. We'll catch up as we always do. Matthew,
chat with you tomorrow.
Looking forward to it. Matthew, you do a great job as always. Thank you for letting me join, and I'll catch up with you in the next day or so as well.
Yeah, because we've got a show next week. Right. Okay. Yep. See you, chap. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Right. Now, this comment, I did actually specifically respond to this person making this comment and say thank you for the comment. But he does make one small mistake in the comment, but we'll get to that.
Matthew sharing that a family tragedy was wrongly twisted to be a miracle that was spread around was a light bulb moment for me. Matthew, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I can completely understand how deeply it would hurt you and create tremendous skepticism about the Bible and Christianity as a whole. I think that this should be a sober reminder of why we need to be critical of modern claims and the movement to find miracles and gifts where they don't exist.
Okay, so the mistake that was made in this is it hasn't created tremendous skepticism about the Bible and Christianity as a whole. My journey out of Christianity was already done by the time I was exposed to the miracle claim as part of my story, because this whole thing was 30 years from initial event to claim about a miracle. And my deconstruction happened right at the tail end of those 30 years. So I was out. So this miracle element of this tragedy in my family doesn't feed my skepticism. I need to make that clear. I thought I'd made that clear on the show. I'll be interested to hear you two guys' thoughts on that. I thought the point of my telling that story was quite clear. It was about the context of stories migrating into a miracle over a relatively short period of time. It wasn't about skepticism.
Right. So whereas your story didn't feed into your skepticism, it absolutely should feed into the skepticism of other people, of real seekers. It absolutely should, because this is a pattern that happens again and again and again, whether it's Craig Keener's Big Book of Miracles or individual Christian miracle claims. Every time you dig deeply into a miracle story, if there's even enough for you to dig into, because there usually isn't, but every time there is, and every time you do the legwork to dig deep enough in it, you will find at the core something that was not at all what was represented by the story. It turns out to not be true every time. And if that's the case for the stories we can dig into, why on earth should we believe miracle stories that we can't dig into? There's a terrible track record of truth and of lies, I should say, and misremembrances and exaggerations when we look into miracle stories. And so, people are getting the wrong message when they say, "Oh, poor Matt, that was your undoing." No, you fool, that should be your undoing.
That's a good point there, David. Thank you for expressing that.
Yeah, and I listened to the episode where you told the story and found it compelling. And I think people who heard you mention this are jumping to a conclusion that this disappointment, it wasn't disappointment. I recall when you described it as almost anger, that something, again, the tragedy had been transmogrified into some claim of, miracle, whatever. People who have heard the episode know that it wasn't the reason for any of your, your deconversion or your change. So, but it's a very strong story, and very useful to folks to hear. People who can't imagine that a miracle could be made up, so to speak, in just a few short years. It's like, yeah, they can.
Yeah, and thanks so much. I didn't expect the response to that particular story that I've got, but there seems to be quite a few people who have picked up out of that nugget from the episode, and it's had more talk about than I thought it would.
Yeah.
Thing is, painful and terrible family stories, so I don't want to inappropriately tarnish the worst part of my mother's life. Her memory deserves more than that. But, maybe there is some practical lessons we can learn from it. But
fascinating approach to demonstrating the veracity of the Gospels. It always seemed to me that when we read in the Gospels about what Jesus said and did, particularly given the cultural context, could not have been made up. And how did such a poorly constructed myth grow so rapidly and become a dominating worldview?
I keep going back to, I've read some on it. I don't recall precisely what the numbers were, but Christianity was just one of many sects, many religions available to people at the time. But I don't know if there were millions of Christians, at least until the Emperor Constantine endorsed it. Stopped persecuting it and then endorsed it. And once it was endorsed by the emperor, I'm guessing it seems like that's when it took off, and became a world religion.
That's correct. It won the lottery, and we talk about how it won the religious lottery, but Constantine could have just as easily endorsed a different religion. Christianity was not, in fact, terribly successful. And we could say that the version of Christianity that was successful was not the first version of Christianity that started out. If your argument is just that it became a success story and therefore couldn't be a myth, Islam is also a success story.
Yeah.
Why doesn't the same logic apply? Mormonism is a great success story. Hinduism is an even older success story. I don't understand what criteria this argumenter would make to say, well, Christianity is the success, so that the success proves its claims, because there are other successes. So if you're saying, well, it's the biggest today, what if it's eclipsed by Islam in 20 years? Then would that make Islam the success?
Yep.
And I was thinking an even more recent example, the Scientology. I don't know anyone other than, the inner circle that doesn't see that thing being made up by a science fiction writer on a whole cloth. And yet a disturbing number of very powerful people, at least in the entertainment industry, swear by it. So, and I got no doubts that it's not true.
No.
And most Christians, don't either.
Yes.
All the other creation myths are just as unusual and unbelievable, so they must be true too.
Yeah, this is a theme.
Yep. I think this is probably the same person who said this in the live chat.
Yeah, probably.
And this was their best comment. So they wanted to get some mileage out of it. Good job, commenter.
The main reason I believe in the resurrection of Jesus is the reaction, lives, and deaths of the disciples. People aren't willing to die for something they know to be a lie.
Yep, I've heard this apologetic trope before myself.
Yeah, we don't know anything about the lives and deaths of disciples. We don't even have proof that there were 12 of them. In fact, when you talk to someone like Mike Licona, he will admit quite freely, if you ask the right questions, about all of the things that we don't know. And then you talk about the deaths of the disciples. Once again, McDowell will admit quite freely on mic, yeah, we don't really know how most of them died. Okay, great. Candida Moss, her book, The Myth of Persecution. Excellent book, by the way. These are examples of Christian scholars admitting we actually don't know, and some of them going even further in saying most of the stories are just false traditions made up by the church, because the stories of persecution and martyrdom are far more valuable than stories of not so special people dying of natural causes. So the fact of the matter is, we don't. And so to accept the idea that all of these things about the lives and deaths of the disciples just means that you've swallowed one more tale that you haven't researched and don't know is true.
Miracles do happen today. They are just not happening to you. I see miracles in my life that can only come from God, and miracles come in different forms.
All right, cool. They're not happening to me.
That's
the discussion. So you're trying to convince me that God loves me and is powerful, and you're saying he just doesn't love you enough to do miracles for you. Well, screw that guy then. I don't know. What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's great. He obviously loves you more than me, so why should I care?
There could be a third point of view, which is something could be perfectly human, as Matthew says, and yet be divine plan at work, bringing all things together, both historical and fictional, to give us a text that is saving and sanctifying to all those who read it with faith.
There's that word again.
Truth need not be confused with the factual alone. Though it must be grounded in the factual, it can transcend the factual through the use of symbolic language to convey the truths that are eternal and have a deeper sense of meaning for life.
I don't know why I copied this in, because I have no idea what's being said here.
Sounds like someone with a strong Roman Catholic influence.
It has that kind of thing about it, doesn't it? It just reeks of a certain type of Christianese, and I'm just turned off by that language these days.
I always appreciate a nice word salad with my meal.
Yes. So long as the dressing is up to the job. Oh, here we go. Somebody loves me.
Matthew's calm demeanour, cogent observations, and personal sharing made for a very enjoyable episode. Excellent moderation. Thanks, Justin.
That was you, wasn't it, David?
No, it wasn't me, because it's demeanor with a U. It's like a British spelling thing.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, no, that's not me.
Yeah, I've had a few thoughts about that as well. So I'm very glad that the cup of tea engaged, and it was a cool, calm conversation. That helped, and it warmed me to Mike actually as a person, which is why he's coming on to Still Unbelievable. So thank you for that validation. I'm not always calm, but that time I was. Oh dear.
Justin saves Mike a lot in this conversation from him admitting that he's simply a presuppositionalist.
Ow.
Right. That could have been me, except I didn't write any of these comments.
But it sounds very much like something you did actually say to me.
Yes, I've said many times.
See, I didn't notice it during the show. That I didn't get that sense, so I don't know what people are seeing that I missed.
Sure.
That
But
I
again,
might
just the
understand.
presuppositional argument, I've seen it done better, but I still remain unconvinced. I mean, there's some people who really know how to go at it and explain it, but a presuppositional is just an apologetic.
Yeah.
It's not logic. It's not philosophy.
No.
It's just believe the book and then, it's just marking out a starting point for a debate. And I think he said something to that effect is let's take the high ground, and let's just assume or act as though the book is true. And then everything else is a lot easier after that. And
Yes.
don't disagree.
Of course it is.
It's just a question of believing the whole story in advance.
No.
In this debate, we're just going to assume that all of my position is true. Let's begin from there.
Yeah, no, it's. I listened to a couple of.
already won comments.
Yeah, I listened to a couple of Presup Christian podcasts, and I find the presupposition by a long way the most frustrating to listen to.
That's why it's so good. A good presuppositionalist can't be beat.
Yeah,
they cannot. And in fact, I wouldn't have known the term at the time, but part of my Christianity, I was a presuppositionalist, and I think a lot of the Church of Christ is presuppositional. We don't spend a lot of time, for instance, talking to atheists. We would say there is no such thing as atheists, that God has revealed himself to everyone, and anyone who doesn't see it is delusional. And so our starting point is, that God actually exists. Here's what you do next. When you are in the South, a place like the Southeast, the Bible Belt, that's actually a good position. It's a good starting point, because most of the people there, even the non-believers, do kind of have that starting point. So it's easy to be a presuppositionalist in some places.
Yeah.
The only other approach to religion that I find nearly as inscrutable as the presup apologetic is Molinism, but let's not go there.
I put this comment in bold, but I don't know why. It's a long one again, so let's go through it.
In Hebrew, they have memory tricks. Native Americans do this too when telling the oral stories. They make the lessons memorable, especially for the language they're written in, like a poem or a joke, and hand-picked stories they tell aren't actually that long and not really that hard to remember if you read it a couple of times. They don't actually take that long to remember the whole books either. If they are told as individual stories, like we tell of past vacations or debates we've had with friends or even fights we've had with our friends, they can be told years later. But if it's something you as a student in school is supposed to remember, you're taking mental notes for later recitation, because that's how you learn from your teacher. Plus, with all your friends, you can go over the details later that day. Plus, you have crowds and crowds of people who were themselves healed. They can back you up and bring in their sides of the story.
Yeah, that doesn't help the memory argument, really.
It doesn't, and it doesn't matter if it were true, because you can't prove it. So someone claims to have remembered their oral tradition verbatim that has gone through for the last 1,000 years. Great. What do you check that against? You can't. So it's a cute claim, I guess, but it's kind of irrelevant, and I don't know how it helps. It's just one of those things that you believe because you have to believe it, I guess. These people have superhuman memories. The problem comes when you actually do something to maybe check the memory. You have someone with one of these superhuman memories tell a story 2 or 3 times, 4 times, and the story changes. The story is different. That's true with any old relative who tells a story again and again and again. The details change. The details get different as they get older and as you get older.
Yeah.
So there's just no way to validate this idea of the magic memory theory.
No.
To
It
the
only works
contrary.
if you're reciting it day after day after day after day. And how many years do you have to do that just to show that you can still remember it the same way 30 years later?
Well, that doesn't actually help you either, though, because you can remember it wrong. There's this old saying, practice makes perfect. But I had a music teacher who opened my eyes a bit and said, that is not true. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent.
Ooh,
And
I
so
like that.
if you practice incorrectly, you're just going to play incorrectly. You will reinforce bad behaviors. And so whatever story that came down the road, and let's say the latest version of it was something that was remembered accurately, how do we know that that was the first telling of the story, though, or that the person who heard the story even heard it right? There's nothing about repetition that tells you that the original story was transmitted correctly.
And again, Bart Ehrman does a really nice job of covering this. In the topic of that book, we can't remember the name of. So,
Are you thinking about misquoting Jesus?
I don't.
Because there was a series of books, Misquoting Jesus, God's Problem.
Right.
It's interesting how of all religions' faiths, it is Christianity that is attacked most virulently by skeptics. It's also interesting that it is the most charitable and welcoming of such debate. This is in stark contrast to Islamic adherents or the fundamentalists of other faiths. Especially interesting given that the Christian faith is primarily about God's incredible love and mercy towards us, and of loving one's neighbour as oneself. The vitriol, hate and frankly bigotry towards anyone professing faith in Christianity was predicted by Jesus, so we shouldn't be all that surprised. It merely increases my conviction that it is true. God brought me back to Christian faith after a 30-year rejection of it. Justin, your show and person are an inspiration. You are a great example of Christian humility and love in action. Your person is the best witness to others. Many thanks.
Christianity draws the fire that it draws because it is doing the most to try to rewrite a secular existence. Now, I can't speak to Europe or England. Are you a part of Europe?
Well,
I don't know what England is anymore. But I can speak to an American idea that I don't even know is true, which is the separation of church and state. No other religion that I know of is trying to tear down the wall of separation between church and state like Christianity. And so, yeah, if that one gets the most fire, it's because it's the one that's out there shooting the most arrows. It's the biggest threat we have. So if Christians were content, to just be Christians and enjoy their private faith and their loving God, I wouldn't have anything to say about it. They're not content with that, though. They want to fuck up my life with it, too. So, yeah, you're going to get a little pushback. Deal with it.
And internally, I think most attacks on Christianity come from other Christians. That's why we end up with tens of thousands of different sects of Christianity. Yeah. It wasn't atheists that did that. It wasn't agnostics. It was, various sects, and all of a sudden you get splinter groups and splinters of splinters. Mm-hmm. And again, I think from what I've heard, they're actually difficult episodes to listen to, but on Justin's program, when Christians describe their apologetic work with Muslims, it sounds really brutal. And I guess that's what comes when, from believing you've got the one true faith. But yeah, it's like, non-believers don't have to go after Islam so much, perhaps because the Christians are doing a really bang-up job of it.
I guess I do attack. This podcast exists to attack Christianity. Let's not shy away from that. My appearance on Unbelievable wasn't to attack Christianity. It was to have a conversation with somebody about a book which I disagreed with. I wasn't there to attack Christianity. And if they got vitriol and hate and bigotry from my appearance on Unbelievable, I suspect the problem is in their interpretation.
It's the tradition that I grew up in. It's the tradition that I know. If I was an ex-Jew, I would have a very different podcast. If I was an ex-Muslim, I'd have a very different podcast. I'm an ex-Christian preacher. I'm a Christian deconstructionist. It would be unnatural for me to have any other kind of podcast.
Right, this person obviously hates me.
I would love to see a debate between Matthew and J. Warner Wallace about the eyewitnesses.
Ouch.
I don't know who this is.
You don't know who is? J. Warner Wallace?
Yeah.
He's the cold
Or
case.
this Matthew guy.
Cold case Christianity. Yeah.
He's pulling our legs, I think.
No, I'm not. I actually don't know who J. Warner Wallace is.
He's a cold case detective, and he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, the premise of which is he went to investigate Christianity as an atheist, and it converted him.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll have to read that.
Right.
Lee Strobel's story told by a homicide detective.
Yeah. No, it sounds awful, but I've got a few brain cells to kill.
I listened to his podcast. It's borderline precept, to be quite honest. It really is that bad. Now, I have a small history with J. Warner Wallace. When Andrew and I first started podcasting together, and I started advertising the podcast on Twitter, and my Twitter account migrated from being a nonsense, very occasionally used Twitter account to just everything still unbelievable. Literally within 6 months of that transition, J. Warner Wallace's Twitter account followed my account, and I thought, wow, that's cool. So I sent him a really nice message via Twitter saying, thank you for the follow. I would love to have a conversation with you about evidence for Christianity on my podcasts. How about it? And I got no reply. And about a month later, I thought, let me just see if I can follow up. So I went and followed up, and I found that J. Warner Wallace's Twitter account had blocked my account, so I could no longer see his account. Apparently he has form for doing that, or if it's not him, it's the people that manage his account.
That must be devastating for you, Matthew. I understand why you're so sad now.
That's why I hate Christianity. It's purely because of that. Christians, and that's why I'm so full of vitriol and hatred and bigotry and all that. It's all because of that.
Every time Matthew presents a valid objection or counter-argument, Mike claims that there's not enough time to flesh all that out and brings up something entirely irrelevant to what was addressed by Matthew. It feels like Matthew was trying to have a conversation and Mike was here to sell his book.
Ow.
Yeah,
I feel I need to defend Mike on that one.
Yeah, I do too. I didn't get that impression. He didn't know how to answer you. And I would say that every time you landed a point, Justin would bail Mike out. I felt like Mike didn't really know how to respond to some of it. And I didn't feel like he was particularly dodging anything.
Yeah, as a person who paid full retail for the book, I would encourage folks to understand that he used his very best arguments in the show. Most of the rest of the stuff in his book is not nearly as strong, almost watered down. And if you want to know what's in the book, you heard the best of it in the podcast and the discussion with Matthew.
I would definitely agree with that.
When authors write a book and their agents that reach out, Andrew and I at Still Unbelievable have had a case in the last few months of somebody reaching out to us because they have a book they want to promote, and we've recorded a lovely episode talking with an author of a book. The title of the book for the upcoming episode is Raising Kids When Church Lets You Down. We had a wonderfully fantastic conversation with that author, and that's an episode that's coming out later. I don't mind the premise of somebody going onto a podcast because they have a book to promote. They've got something to talk about. They spent time writing the book. They spent time researching the book, you hope. Yeah, and now they want to talk about it. Let them talk about it. And I have absolutely no problem with somebody going on to Justin's show with a book to promote, yes, and even to sell. Let them do it, and let them engage with somebody who's read the book and disagrees with them. That's part of what Justin's show brings, and it does it well most of the time. I'm genuinely not a problem with that.
Yeah, me either. I don't see what the commenter did, and maybe I just missed it, but I had a more charitable take for Mike's performance than that, and my take on his performance wasn't all that charitable. So
yeah, it's that was unnecessary to say that.
As an agnostic, I found Mike very unconvincing and bordering on embarrassing.
Now that's an ouch.
well, and that I would say, if I were on the bubble, I would be off the bubble on the side that Mike was not on. I find his arguments to be just insulting, intellectually insulting. It may be a good kind of argument for a certain kind of person, but the kind of people that we interact with on the internet every day, I think most of them would be intellectually insulted by it.
That's partly why I made the comment at the beginning of the show about I wasn't really sure who Mike's target audience was, because I didn't feel that I was his target audience.
Well, and he says it in the book that the purpose of apologetics is to keep believers, I call it between the guardrails, keep them from running off the road. It's not to convince non-believers to believe. And
Right.
That makes some sense to me.
Didn't he say that he had the initial inspiration was to explain things to his kids? It just became a bigger project, because this kind of sounds like the type of thing you would say to children or people who don't have the ability to push back or have done any research.
It might be. He has written a previous book about parenting as a Christian. I can't remember what the title of the book is. So it could be that some of the stuff that didn't make the cut for that he gathered together and fleshed out, or some stuff that he didn't think could work in that book he saved to one side for another book. So it could be, but that's speculation. I don't know for a fact.
Yeah, I thought he mentioned something like that in the podcast, but I'd have to go back and listen to it, and I never will.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't do it again, man. I love you, Matt, but I can't go back to that.
Okay, this one made me laugh out loud. There weren't that many comments. Actually, quite a lot of comments made me laugh out loud. Why did I say that? But this one really tickled me.
I really wonder when Justin is going to leave the faith. He seems like such a rational guy sometimes. He could still host Unbelievable as an atheist.
Hey, the Tyler Vela story, he may have been doing it for the last several years. Yeah. How would you know?
Yeah. How would we know? Could you imagine the coup? He wouldn't be able to come clean, would he? Can you just imagine the ripples?
It resonated with me because I had a sense, especially when we were interacting with him, routinely and and doing lots of commenting in the comment section beneath the episodes, that he was at least on the bubble with regard to perhaps abandoning strict evangelicalism. I think that he believes, or it seemed to me he was open to the idea there might be other ways to be a good Christian without being evangelical.
Absolutely.
But lately, and over the past couple of years, I think that that tendency or that opportunity has passed, and seems more fully engaged and more comfortable in his strict Christianity than he was.
Justin was kind of visibly shaken several years ago. You all will recall, with the show he did with Derren Brown.
Yeah.
That show was so good, and you should go back into the archives and look that one up if audience who you don't know what I'm talking about. But Derren Brown, I think he's maybe been on the show a couple of times. The first appearance was so impactful that Justin pulled together a special group of people to do a round table to discuss the show and to kind of rehabilitate the Christian position a little bit, because it was that bad of a beatdown. And I think that Justin has walked a little bit more carefully since that time. Derren Brown is a very impressive individual who does the kind of the Christian faith healer magic, but is an absolute secularist. It explains all of the mind tricks he's doing. He is in what he showed Justin really was, yeah, all of this stuff that you read in your Bible that you find so convincing, I can do it today, and I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
Mike's response to the embarrassment criticism where Matthew brings up situations in fiction where the protagonist makes a mistake is not a thorough one and missed the point. Jesus was not making a mistake that he later makes up for. Rather, these are literally part of his personality, his divine nature, who he is, and so forth. So Matthew's criticism that embarrassing features of a story are explained by this trope ignores the fact that the embarrassments are not mistakes, but literally features of the narrative, and more importantly, of the moral aspects of what he teaches.
I don't think I ever said they were mistakes.
I don't remember you saying that. The criterion of embarrassment was brought up, I think, by Mike. It is in his book, but the idea that, again, if you believe that the Gospels were written by the person they're attributed to, then they were written, recorded or at least remembered as what had happened in real time. But if you believe, as I think most scholars do, and I certainly do, that they were written later, redacted later, they're not what. It's not what Jesus said. It's what people said Jesus said, and and so on and so forth, down for 30 or 40 or 50 years before it got written down. In some cases, by some very clever writers who made some, potentially very interesting literature out of, the bare bones of the story. Again, this idea that the apostles would have been embarrassed to admit that they did these things. They didn't write these things. The story's written about them, not by them.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if these are features of the narrative, why do they come under the category of embarrassments?
Right.
So
again, I think betrays the bias that people are.
Yeah.
That they were recorded at the time. It's like, don't write that down. We'll look stupid. And it's like, yeah. And then in some cases they do. But I think that's because it was written down later by someone who was making a different sort of point to a different audience.
I don't actually have anything useful to say about the comment, but I'm always fascinated by the capitalization of he.
Yes.
In you know that you're dealing with a certain kind of funding because they take the time to capitalize he, but they're not careful enough to capitalize his and him as carefully. I'll just point it out.
Yeah.
Just looking at this is my bad editor's eye. I've had to do this kind of thing professionally some, and it's just, who you're talking to already when you see those capital H's pop up.
I used to be that kind of Christian. If I was writing anything, especially to unbelievers, and it was a conversation about God, if I was ever saying he and referring to God, I made sure every single one was capitalized, and I would go back and double check before hitting send. I was that kind of Christian.
Right, because you're gonna burn in hell if you miss one.
Oh,
God's gonna be so offended.
God needs to know how much I love him.
I love it with a capital H. Wait a minute. So sorry.
Now I
just
don't care. Even G. Let's go as a lowercase.
No, I don't capitalize any of it. I capitalize Jesus. I capitalize Yahweh or Jehovah. I capitalize names. But the God, I could take it or leave it. I usually just don't capitalize it in hopes of pissing Christians off. It's true. I have to write God so many times. One of the banes of my existence, because I write these long write-ups for my stuff, whenever you put the words the Bible together on a Mac, not iOS, by the way, on a Mac, the Bible, even if it's at the beginning of the sentence, it will decapitalize the and capitalize Bible.
Really?
Bible, yes. So if it's in the middle of a sentence, it'll just capitalize Bible. It'll just go back behind you and capitalize it. But if it's at the beginning of the sentence, it will take the capitalization off of the capitalized Bible. I don't know. It's some kind of special emphasis. I have tried every trick I know to make it stop doing this. You don't know how much time it costs me to go back and say, no, I didn't mean Bible. I meant Bible. Just stop trying to fix me.
It's a miracle meant for you, David.
Yeah, you see. And you don't believe in miracles. Right, we're drawing to a close, guys. Just a few left.
It seems that Matthew is so driven to keep finding and adding reasons to refute his former Christian faith that he appears more desperate to convince himself of his unbelief.
Which for
Teddy,
me
is that you?
It is the Teddy, isn't it?
Which for me is sad, because it is more revealing of a nagging and countervailing sliver of belief within him, even as he has suffered terribly from a traumatic family tragedy that he alludes to in the interview. May the Lord meet Matthew and heal him from his deeply painful past.
Oh, what patronizing crap was that?
Okay, I'm going to just go with that patronizing crap. Let us know, Matt, when the Lord meets you and heals you of this. And if he doesn't, I guess that would be yet another disconfirmation.
I you know what he's done? He's simultaneously healed me and given me that gallbladder at the same time, so that I didn't notice anything.
I think we just appealed to a particularly lazy demon. We'll do better next time.
Yeah, we're going to need to explain that reference, aren't we?
There's a backstory here. No. You should just let it hang. Just let it hang. If they weren't listening to Skeptics and Seekers a couple of seasons ago, that's on them.
That's right.
Yeah. reasonpress@gmail.com if you need to know the backstory. There you go. That will be a test, won't it? How many people actually listened this far into the episodes?
This brief hint of Matthew's testimony of personal experience with a tragic story evolving into a false story of miraculous. This has a persuasiveness that I would like to hear. At the same time, I could appreciate how Matthew's statement of the painfulness of that story would give him hesitancy to share the details, while at the same time deepening his skepticism.
That was not why I told the story. Okay. David, where can people go to hear more details about this story?
They can go straight to hell. Let me tell you what Christians want, and I mean this sincerely, because I've been doing this for a long time, and I've ran into these Christians for a long time. What they want is to find every skeptic out there and have the skeptic tell them their story, kind of like Cybok on Star Trek V. They want to share their pain, and what the Christian is looking for is that bit of pain that explains why the person is an atheist, and once they can get that explanation, they can write it off as, okay, this person stopped believing in God for bad reasons. That's the game that they're playing. They just want enough personal details so they can say, okay, that's it. And when they get that, they don't have to listen to the skeptic's arguments anymore. They can write off the arguments, and they can tell themselves another day, no skeptic has any good argument for not believing. No, it was because of this personal pain. And then they go to sleep at night. That's what all this is about. And I refuse to credit it. That said, I've told my story many times. I'll tell it many more times. But for those who are just kind of the pain voyeurs, they're looking for our pain porn to exploit for reasons to dismiss our story. Fuck you.
Yeah. This is also why I don't answer the question, what would it take for you to believe in God? Because as soon as I give anything that's remotely specific, oh, God wouldn't do that for you. Don't ask me the question then.
You see, he's got unreasonable expectations.
Yeah.
Do for me what you did for the Apostle Paul on the road to Antioch. Is that unreasonable? Do for me what you did for Gideon. Is that unreasonable?
Yeah. Right. Final two. So this one's got a timestamp.
1:17:05. Incorrect. Mark 14:8. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial.
This is a specific reference to when we were talking about the women at the tomb, and this is the whole criteria of embarrassment thing. And I said during my research before the show, I found out that the woman would not go to anoint the body after it's been buried. They would anoint it before it's been buried. So this whole going to the tomb to anoint the body is out of order. So this whole appeal to embarrassment doesn't actually work for that specific instance and that specific case. That was the thing that I said. So this one is saying she poured the perfume on the body beforehand to prepare for my way. So this is what one of the Marys anointing Jesus' feet with her hair. That was anointing him for the burial. Really? Is that how you're reading that? Actual literal anointing him for his burial? But they didn't do it then. They did it after they died. This is desperate stretching. This is, isn't it?
It's embarrassing.
Therefore, it must be true. Is that how that works?
No. The reasoning is embarrassing. It's just I got nothing. I passed. Hard pass. That's what I should have said.
Yeah.
Sorry. The lengths that Christians will go through to make the Gospels make sense. It's truly heroic efforts, and I can save them. All of those efforts. You're starting with the wrong starting point. Don't start with the Gospels. Don't start with apologetics. Just do me a damn miracle. Get these plates and screws out of my leg and have me walk normally without pain. Now we can talk. All right. My mind is open to any interpretation you got. Really, you got the upper hand at that point. So start there.
Yeah. Michael, do you have some thoughts?
I'll take a pass on this one.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, right. Last one.
Interesting watch. Now, I'll just say Matthew has made several claims without presenting any evidence to support. The text has been changed over time. Okay, but what text? From the word beginning to the day to morning. Also, he later said the events while Jesus was on the cross sounds like it's been added later. No evidence presented for this claim either.
Defend me, guys.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'm sorry. Sorry, you're just slow on the button. I've been watching Jeopardy all my life, man.
That's right.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. This has been done by others. But first of all, they're the ones claiming, miracle stories.
Yeah.
So they're the ones claiming something out of the ordinary. So I think the burden of proof is on them, but not in a presuppositional apologetic. To the part around the events of Jesus on the cross, Ehrman does some nice work with this. But again, the idea of you read the Passion narrative side by side, in parallel, and they're different stories, different details, increasing levels of detail, written as literature in a more sophisticated way, and the theology grows, from one gospel writer to the next.
Yeah.
So what were Jesus' last words on the cross? Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? Or it is finished, or into your hands I commend my spirit. It's like, did he say those all? I've actually heard Christians suggest that, which was pretty fascinating, because he would have, from what I understand of crucifixion, you're unlikely to be a chatty Cathy up there, hung by your arms so that you can't even breathe, let alone talk. But again, the idea that the story got better and better, more and more interesting, more and more compelling, I guess, speaks of literary enhancement over time.
Yeah.
This is one of those times, Michael, where I think you're working too hard. Yes, you're right, and all of that. But I'm just looking at the comment itself. Matt has made several claims without presenting any evidence. This is kind of a turning of the tables type defense for the Christian, because the Christian knows that they are inherently making a lot of claims, and they get tired of us asking them to provide evidence for their claims. And so what they try to do is turn the tables and say, well, you didn't provide any evidence. Where's your evidence? You didn't provide any evidence for your claim. And they end up saying this in situations where no claim has even been made. But it helps take the pressure off of their shoulders. And so if you look at the two examples that he gives, the texts have been changed over time. Well, first of all, nobody disputes this, but he says, okay, but what texts? What? Huh? This sounds like a preschooler in a playground here. What do you mean? What text? The text that we're talking about? He says, I don't understand that next sentence, but he says also later says the events while Jesus was on the cross sounds like it's been added in later. Yes, that's how it reads to me. This is what Matthew says. It seems to me like this is the kind of thing that's been added in later. This is not a claim that needs to be defended. This is how it reads. This is how it sounds to me. The Christian is so desperate, though, to find a skeptic making a positive claim that they can say evidence, that they end up with stuff like this. And so I find this all fairly dismissible, really dismissible. You can give reasons, and I think Matthew did. You can give reasons for why you think this sounds like, these are things that have been added. And this is where I would say, Michael, yes, you're right about all of this, and more reasons that I could give. But that's not actually a claim. All he's saying is that Matt said this sounds like the kind of thing that was added later. Right? In the same way that someone would tell you something fantastical, I was abducted by aliens last night, and you would say, that sounds like the kind of thing someone would say on shrooms. Well, the response is not, give me evidence that they were on shrooms. Hang on. But this is the kind of reflexive response that Christians have. This is what they're reduced to.
Yeah. My response is that in terms of the text change, I'm assuming they're talking about when I was referencing the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's a specific claim in chapter 2 of Mike's book about a certain book being found exactly the same in the caves. And when I went and investigated that and looked it up, I found that that's not the case, that it wasn't a single text, it was multiple texts, and that not only were those texts different from each other, but they're different to what we've got. And there was a history that could be found in the investigations of those texts. And I made reference to some of the facts that were found from that study in history. It's really easy to find out what has happened, what they found from those caves in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
What he should have asked for is attestation, but that's not what he asked for. He didn't ask for a link. He didn't ask for a source who says, yeah, but what text? Okay, I don't know what you're talking about, you idiot.
Yeah. And notice how Mike's not told off in this comment for his references to verisimilitude, which is, this seems like it's true to me, so I'm going to take it. But me saying, well, it doesn't seem like it's true to me, so I'm not, is apparently wrong. So I'm nicely amused by the blinkeredness of that. Plus also the nature of that kind of conversation on Unbelievable. What is expected? What evidence can you possibly bring to a podcast recording like that when you're discussing a book? You can make references to things that exist, but you can't actually bring the evidence.
Well, there's no evidence to bring at the end of the day. And I think that all of these comments, by the way, it was an excellent performance on Unbelievable. I'll just say that again. I've listened to, a decade of Unbelievable, and this was the best first showing on Unbelievable I've ever heard. And so congrats on that. I think what this list of comments and questions and things that we've been going through today highlight is just how unconvincing the Christian arguments are. I mean, we can argue back and forth with commenters and readers, and I enjoy that, so that's fine. And I hope no one takes anything that I've said as truly mean-spirited. It's just internet sport to me, so that's fine. Nothing personal. I don't know you. I'm sure I would like you. But at the end of the day, no one is convinced by an argument like humans couldn't have possibly written this book or couldn't have possibly made this up, or that's not I don't even know why one would waste time on that argument, because that's not going to get someone from the bar to the baptismal pool. That's not going to be the thing that makes the difference. If you look at the internet conversation on about Christianity and atheism, skeptics and seekers, stills and unbelievables. If you just look at the conversation that has been going on the internet for a couple of decades, notice how little of it deals with anything that would be convincing one way or the other. And so what I would invite Christians to do is quit wasting your time with stuff like this. You are spinning your wheels. You're making your case worse, if anything. And have a moment of real talk with Matt or Andrew or Michael or me or anybody. Have a moment of real talk and talk to us about what really matters to you, what really convinces you that Christianity is right, and what the argument that you really think is why I should believe the way you do. Let's have those conversations, because these conversations just reveal how shallow these conversations are. I'm ready to have a deeper, more useful, more impactful conversation. And I invite anyone else who's ready for that to come along for the ride.
Well said.
Thank you, David. It was good fun being on Unbelievable. I enjoyed it. I relaxed into it really quickly, which I think helped with the way the show went. We're recording this 2 weeks after that, and I was hoping that I was going to be able to include some of the listener comments that Justin reads out. But I haven't. I think Justin's been away for a couple of weeks, so we've had 2 shows of Unbelievable without any listener comments at the end. So my nervousness about waiting for the listener comments is having to extend a little bit longer. So we will see what comments will come in from that show. Hopefully it'll be next weekend. And if there's anything that needs commenting or anything that we feel we'd like to respond to from that batch, we'll see what we can do. We'll see if we will do something else. Thank you both for your time. 3 and a bit hours. This was Monster. Thank you to the listeners if you've got that far. And until next time, stay reasonable. Oh, thank you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. How long have you been doing that? This sign off. Until next time, stay reasonable. Is that like a thing you do now?
Yep, that's the thing that I do. You not listen to my podcast?
Not often. Not every time.
Not all the way to the end. Yeah.
I mean,
not all the way to the I've been doing that for about a year now.
I've heard it. I know I've heard it, and yet it hasn't connected in my head that this is a sign off. And now I am very upset because I've been looking for a sign off. I don't know how to end my shows, and they just come kind of stumbling to an end every time. And it just now hit me. This is why they're beating me in the polls. Stay reasonable. Wow. I got work to
do. Yours needs to be keep taking the cocaine of certainty.
No, you're trying to make me lose even worse in the polls. I see what you're doing now.
You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.